Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel and welcome to TechStrong TV. Today's Thursday, June 18th. Welcome to the show. Hope you are having a good week wherever you are and wherever you're watching this from. Of course, TechStrong TV is streamed out on our Digital Anarchist network, and through that you have access to watch this on LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live, YouTube, on our DevOps TV channel, on the Media Ops site, DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard, or maybe on our mobile app, the DevOps.com mobile app, or the DevOps.com OTT app, which is available on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire. So, no, as well as actually, I should mention, on TechStrong.tv and on DigitalAnarchist.com. So hopefully, with all of those choices, you find a place to watch it. Of course, the show is streamed live Monday, Tuesday, Thursday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. It's available on demand. The rest of when we're not streaming live. And on Wednesday and Fridays, we're now replaying out of the archives previous TechStrong TV shows. So I hope that works all for you. Let me tell you what we have in store for today. Leading off, I was able to catch up with my friend Ashok Reddy, who's the CEO of Digital.ai, which of course was the company formed by the merger of, it's actually several companies now. Actually, they announced two more acquisitions yesterday of Numerify and Experitest, that's the fifth acquisition they've done at Digital.ai, and Ashok is going to tell us all about that. And then after Ashok, another old friend of mine who I know since I think 2011 or maybe more, Alon Gromsky. And Alon, of course, was the founder of BlazeMeter, pioneer in continuous testing, open source continuous testing automation. BlazeMeter, of course, was acquired by CA a couple of years ago, and then CA itself was acquired by Broadcom. Well, now Alon has gotten a lot of the gang back from BlazeMeter, or at least some of the key folks, and together they've launched a new company called UP9, recently came out of stealth, and it's bigger than BlazeMeter in terms of its mission. It's an automated testing platform, and but it's more than just writing tests or even doing tests. It's about analytics and analysis and everything else. It's a pretty ambitious project. Alon's going to tell us all about it, and I look forward to our discussion. And then from the Something Old archive, again, we are replaying from TechStrongCon just 2 weeks ago. A lot of the sessions, kind of one at a time for you to take a look at. Today's session is fantastic. First of all, it features one of my favorite presenters, Cornelia Davis. Cornelia, if you haven't seen her before, is a powerhouse. She's just, really smart, really gets it, really understands the developer mindset, the DevOps mindset. And, she is one of the voices behind the movement now for what we call GitOps, right? And Cornelia's presentation at TechStrongCon was on GitOps, and in it she's going to give us a behind the curtain look at what is GitOps and why is it important to you. So it's a long one. It's almost an hour long, her presentation, but well worth the time. Please check it out. After Cornelia, I'll be back with the news, and then head things over to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon, up in Virginia. And Charlene has Kurt Sand, head of automation at Broadcom, on for today, speaking of CA and Broadcom. And then Charlene is also going to have a new feature we're going to be doing regularly here on TechStrong.com, or TechStrong.tv, and that is a webinar preview. It's going to be about 5 minutes long, but Charlene's going to preview the webinars coming up in the next week across our Media Ops network. We put on anywhere from 3 to 6 webinars a week, and they're usually really good. So Charlene's going to give you a preview of those and You can figure out which ones are interesting to you, which ones you'd like to maybe register for. Back before COVID, no one called webinars virtual webinars. They're always virtual. But we're doing interesting things with our webinars too now, trying to make them more interactive. So have a listen to what Charlene's going to say on that. After Charlene, it's, you know what time it is, Analyst Corner with Mitch. Mitchell Ashley from Accelerated Strategies Group will have a nice session. And then it's Thursday, so I think we're going to have a channel roundup with Mike Vizard. Mike's joined this week by his cohort, Frank Olhurst. And Mike and Frank will be talking channel. I'll be back to wrap things up after that. It's going to be a great show. Stay tuned. We're going to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
Our first interview today, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is with Ashok Reddy. Ashok is the CTO of Digital.ai, a company that's making a big splash in, what I call the end-to-end DevOps play. They are backed by one of the top 5 hedge funds in the world, and not shy, I guess, about making acquisitions, even during COVID. It's one of the things I discussed with Ashok is how do you do an acquisition when you can't meet these people kind of face-to-face? Well, you can meet them face-to-face on Zoom, but you can't even shake hands, right? And but Ashok's getting it done. They announced 2 acquisitions this week on Tuesday. One was a company called Numerify in the AI analytics space, and one was Experitest in AI and continuous testing. And you could see Ashok literally, they started with the merger of CollabNet version 1 and Zibia Labs. Then they added a DevSecOps security play. And you could see him filling in the pieces here for this end-to-end platform that they're building. It's going to be interesting to see, right? I mean, there's more than just assembling pieces. You need to integrate them. You need to make them work together. You want to have the sum of the parts greater than the individual pieces. But, Ashok has done this before. He's had executive positions at IBM and CA, and it's going to be interesting. He's getting it done there. So let's now go to our conversation with Ashok Reddy, CEO of Digital.ai, about their latest 2 acquisitions.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session on TechStrong TV. My guest today is my friend Ashok Reddy, who, of course, is the CEO of Digital.ai, a now leading provider in the value stream management platform space. Ashok, is that right?
Yes. Hi. Good morning, Alan. It's great to be with you again.
Pleasure to have you here.
Absolutely. No, I think, Digital.ai is focused on providing an intelligent value stream platform from how do we deliver business value from concept to cash.
Yep. I saw it in the most recent messaging. I saw the change in message, the update of the messaging. So Ashok, we've had you on a couple times in the past. Of course, just for a quick recap for our audience, Digital.ai was originally formed by the merger of Zibia Labs, based up in Boston. And I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of Eric Robertson's company.
We formed merging Collabnet version 1,
Collabnet, version 1.
Xavier
Yes.
Labs, and later on we acquired ArcSan Technologies. So
That was the the third company. And of course, the digital AI, the private equity company who is helping put all this together is
TPG Capital is the private equity firm, and they're one of the top 5 firms, and they actually are still involved in helping us. So we obviously acquired 2 more companies.
right. So that's what we're here to talk about today. The digital AI team has struck again with not 1, but 2 acquisitions in the middle of a pandemic. Everyone's virtual. You're out buying companies. Congratulations, number 1. But let's first talk about the companies, Ashok, and what they bring to the digital AI family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Alan, I guess, as we have discussed, we are focused on the enterprise 5,000 or global 5,000 companies who generally, increasingly are becoming, we all know everyone is becoming a technology, digital company, but then they have to have a trade-off between what they need to do in terms of speed and agility and delivering value to also dealing with all the regulations and stability. They have to run the business, and at the same time, they have to make changes to the business and continuously innovate so they can become the digital incumbent. So in that context, I think the 2 companies we acquired, each one brings unique capabilities. Numerify is a company which is focused on artificial intelligence and AI-based business analytics, which is almost like you can think about, we have a very unpredictable times right now with COVID and everything else, but what businesses want is predictable results. So how do you try to combine predictability in an unpredictable time? So we feel Numerify will give us a platform which is open source, cloud-based technology, which allows us to look at all the data across everything from the business to how do you develop software, to how do you deploy, to test and secure, to how do you run and look at the entire customer journey map, to be able to help decisions and look at change risk, predicting risk, and how do we kind of look at DevOps in terms of the value streams. So I think Numerify, provides that AI-based capabilities. The second one, again, equally excited about Experitest. Experitest is focused on helping on the continuous testing of web and mobile applications. Experitest has a cloud-based platform where you could, today's world, everybody is working remotely, and it's becoming increasingly important for, like McDonald's is introducing digital kiosks and safe distancing, and more people, or even government services, everything is done on mobile. And so Experitest allows you to test in more than 2,000 different devices worldwide. You can pick any device, iPhone or Android device. You can simulate, test, and deploy. And this is also in any browser. So Experitest is a leader in that space. And we believe that in order to really provide that digital transformation, we need a continuous testing platform, which I had mentioned to you the last couple of times, where we had, like, I think you also talked about having that. So it brings continuous testing end to end, and obviously it's AI driven. Also, they look at outcomes, and I think that's one of the key thing for us was it's not just about testing, but at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure the apps are reliable, but also are they being used by the customers? What's the ratings in App Store? What are the sentiments? And being able to understand that through AI-based approach to detecting changes and being able to deliver that in regardless of what device, iPad or phone or whatever. That's, I think, what Experitest does.
Excellent. So really, I mean, they're obviously two separate companies, but they play in 2 separate places here. Let's, if we can, for a minute, Ashok, focus in on the continuous testing space. Because to me, I mean, that is such a linchpin, such a vital part of this whole process of CI/CD, of the whole value stream chain,
Yes.
right? Without that testing, and as we now call it, continuous testing, automated, speeding up the ability to get software through quality, so that we can release it. That's a real part of it. How do you integrate that into what you already had at digital.ai?
No, I think that's a great question. I think part of the testing is in the past, I think everybody has been talking about, well, I need to bring shift left testing, right? I think it's all about, don't make testing the last mile versus making it part of everyone's job. But I think it's still the testing is focused on continuous integration and testing where you're trying to drive it as part of automated testing, but you need to drive it all the way from the business outcome. So somebody defines what outcome I'm trying to do, what's the customer journey look like, so you start with that and make sure that the trust is what customers expect. And so you start with that. So to us, we can integrate this all the way to when you define the OKRs and the outcome a company is trying to do, what type of customer journey maps we need to have, omni-channel, being able to do that throughout, automating it. But also what's important now is shift right testing, which is once it's deployed, more and more applications are becoming intelligent, personalization. So they're going to start reacting differently based on who they encounter, what type of data. So what's the difference between shift left and shift right anymore? Because you need to be able to connect things which are running in production in the app stores and then being able to bring that. And so how do you help developers to kind of manage test? It's almost like a hypothesis. So just shipping a product is different than, is it really working and doing what it's supposed to do? And then, like a Tesla autopilot feature, once it's out there, it's going to do different things based on the data. So how do you test something which is in the pre-production environment? Shift left is one thing, but shift right. So we expect this is with the .ai in our company name is really about that. How do you make it intelligent, and also the applications and experiences which are going to become intelligent and data-driven. And that, I think, is where Expert Test will help us to do both shift left all the way to the business outcome, but also once it's deployed, and is it delivering the type of experiences people expect when it starts changing based on who they are.
You brought up the AI thing, Ashok, and I think that's one of the big aha moments that people need to come to, that when we talk about AI, we're not going to go create some Skynet, right? That it's sentient and it's going to decide that humans aren't worthy, right? What we're talking about with AI is building intelligence into distinct applications or distinct functions to try to make those functions react better to real-world stimulus, to real-world situations that, quite frankly, you can't necessarily model those real-world simulations until you're out in the real world, right? But it's not that we're going to go create some android robot or something that, that's going to be intelligent. That's not what AI is all about. Another thing that I had this discussion the other day with another technology executive, is that too much of the emphasis on testing has been on go faster, automate more, go faster, automate more. There's a saying, speed kills, right? And sometimes it's not just the speed. We can't automate everything, right? What we're finding is that testers, especially testing professionals who've done testing for 10 years, 15 years, they do automate what they can, which allows them to do other kinds of tests. But really, what we need to start focusing on is, are we delivering the features that the customer wants? Because it's really not about how many tests we ran, or how often I delivered code, or how many builds a day I do, or how many lines of code it is. Did the customer get the feature that is going to enable him to do what he wants? Is that feature going to make the customer pay the client for the functionality? And that's where we need to focus on, right? As an industry, not just here, not just testing, but really about those features. What What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you hit it on the nail on the head, right? I think it's really comes down to what outcome are we trying to drive with any
Yeah.
application, right? It's almost like it's the behavior change you want from a customer who's using your feature or app. So it's really doing what they are actually trying to do. To your point, we can test whatever we want, and it's only going to get harder because we have to focus on the changes also. This whole transformation is about change. Can we look at what, if something changed, do we test everything again, or do we focus on those things which are impacted by the change? And then be able to understand that. I think that's where AI, to some extent, machine learning comes in, where you can look at what changed since last time I did this thing. Is it an object change, or is it, especially in a user experience, things constantly change. Some developers change some experience, and now people are using voice and emotional things to gestures to kind of look at what needs to happen. How do you actually test those things? To me, that's really where AI comes in, is more and more to determine what changed in an intelligent way when there is so many people. I mean, you talk about digital, now you're dealing with millions and millions of touch points worldwide. And the manual testing or any automation, when things change is where it breaks. Are you adaptable? And that, I think, is what enterprises want to be. They want to be adaptive and flexible. At the same time, they can't do everything. They have to run the business, and they want to make sure when something changes, how can I leverage AI? And also, it helps with. I think the challenge also with AI is, people talk about bias, right? I mean, people are now worried about using AI to look at facial recognition or other. So we also want to take a look at how do we use testing as a way to prevent bias and having privacy issues. And with AI, you should also be able to explain how did something happen, how did the decision happen. So that, I think, is where it can't be just a black box. So there is multiple things what we can do there, but I agree with you. It all comes down to the outcomes we're trying to drive, specific behaviors of customer changes, and focus on the change versus you can't just keep automating and doing more testing. That's not going to work.
Absolutely. All right, let's move the focus over, and I apologize. The first company was Numerify. You mentioned they have an open source project that they're behind and everything. Now, look, Zibia Labs was a big supporter of open source, right? They worked with most of the open source tools out there. But it's different when you're actually managing an open source project here. What are the plans to continue Numerify's mentorship of the project?
I think Numerify and Experitas both leverage open source, like Apache Spark is one of the biggest machine learning libraries there, right? So they leverage that, and we kind of participate in it. But we'll continue to. I think the secret sauce is Apache Spark, Kafka, all these things which are enterprise scale. It came out of LinkedIn and coming out of Netflixes of the world. So what it does give us is the scale and the latency and other things, and many people are contributing, but making it more specific to the enterprises we serve, providing it in a purpose-built application. So what Numerify does is, AI and machine learning, it could be very generic. And if you try to apply, it may not be that effective. And what Numerify does is provide a set of apps. So if you want to manage change risk, if you want to make a change, what's the risk of that for an enterprise? What happens to the user ratings? So if you can predict the change before you introduce a change based on the history and learning from the kind of context, from a DevOps perspective, developers or business owners can now know what the impact is. It's not just about fail fast, it's about learn fast, right? So how do I learn quickly based on this thing? So Numerify is really leverages open source. It's a cloud, all cloud. Companies like McDonald's are using it to transform McDonald's. We have 5 out of the Fortune 50 companies use that to run, and some of the largest consumer companies and others. What they do is to leverage all the data they have. I think increasingly companies are realizing the data is the new oil, but they want to have their own oil wells, right? I think basically you create your own oil well in terms of the data about your customers and experiences and touch points. How do you learn from it? How do you predict things before they happen? And how do you improve efficiency, but also effectiveness? Are you working on the right things in the first place? It's not just about the outputs. software, everybody focuses on deployments and how fast I'm delivering, to your point. But are we effective? Are we driving the right behavior change to the company? Are we driving the NPS scores or whatever the customer, reducing customer churn? I think that's really what Numerify allows us to combine effectiveness with efficiency in terms of what we need to do from an end-to-end value stream perspective.
Fair enough. So I'm going to ask you to put on your CEO's hat here for a second now and talk to us about, look, we're in the middle of COVID. Everyone is working remote. We were joking about it off camera before we started recording. You know, how do you get an acquisition done? You can't even shake people's hands in person and all that. But really, look, that's monies get wired, right? PDFs get electronically signed. It's all good. But how do you integrate these new companies, these new employees, these new technologies into the mix from a totally remote situation, right? And that, that's part of the CEO's job, right? Is to figure out how we're going to do that. How are you doing it, Ashok?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, this is for me, I've done many acquisitions in many years, and this is the first time two of them we've done pretty much remotely. I mean, I think it starts with, understanding of what we're trying to do, the cultural fit and the people. We obviously have customers. We look at customer success, and, as you said, there is a lot of things we can do, systems integration very easily in terms of IT systems and things like that. But it's more, how do you actually get to know the people? And so we spend a lot of time, just like this, on Zoom calls and people who maybe, in terms of we have worked in the past in some cases, because we have been partners for Numerify, for example. I knew Gaurav for a while. And so what happens is, even Tali, the CEO of Experitest, so we end up kind of establishing, relationships we already had. And at the same time, we can't get to everyone and meet everyone, but we do a lot more town halls and meet with people. And right now, I think in terms of products and things like that, we are doing remote agile planning, safe planning in terms of understanding what we need to do together. And we know our customers are dealing with this, so it is no different from that perspective. Onboarding new employees and getting them email. I think the cybersecurity is very important. I mean, there is lots of incidences of cybersecurity. People. There is a lot more phishing going on in companies. And when you don't know people, when you're acquiring, how do you know you're dealing with the employees of the company you're working with versus so there are some things, but I think it comes down to, business has to go on. And we believe that we can't let some of this stop everything. And so we are hiring, frankly, 60 some people right now worldwide. And we are strengthening our team, but it's definitely a learning experience for us, and hopefully we can share some best practices for people who are looking to acquire other companies.
Absolutely, it'd be a great business school case, right? How to do this in a pandemic. Ashok, in terms of the management team, I'm going to assume that most of the, if not all of the employees of the two companies are going to be remaining on.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. No, I think, we are basically, both the company CEOs are continuing as general manager of the businesses. We have an analytics, I almost call them value streams, right? We are focused on value streams, which is focused on not vertical, most companies organize themselves on vertical functions, but value streams is all about organizing around how do you deliver value to the customers, the personas you're going after. So I see Tali, she's based in Israel, but she is the GM of this new continuous testing value stream. And then we have Gaurav, who is the CEO of Numerify, will be the general manager of the analytics and AI value stream. Plus, he's also going to be the CTO for the whole company. And then we are keeping pretty much most of the people, and there are some redundancies in some shared services and SG&A areas, but outside that, generally, our philosophy is we are buying companies for the people first and the technology. And so our goal is to bring them along. And obviously, pretty much all the key senior people are staying, and we look forward to working with them to create this end-to-end platform.
Excellent. Well, congratulations, Ashok. One last question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. Are you done buying companies?
Alan, I guess, I think I said this last time also. We have a strategic plan in terms of where we want to go, building a digital world with enabling trust side of things. So in that context, what we do is look at, what we need to do to continue to partner, or do we acquire, or we are doing a lot of organic innovation right now, which is a big focus for us. And obviously integrating 5 companies in a very short period of time takes efforts. I do think that we want to focus on operationalizing and making sure that we have delivering value, make a customer successful. But I think we'll continue to look at strategic acquisitions. Where we partner. We have a lot of companies we are partnering. We'll be announcing, because when you look at individual capabilities across the value chain. So I think definitely we'll. TPG are one of the best companies to work with in terms of investment. They are behind us, and so we continue to look for strategic and also some smaller tuck-ins. But I would say right now my focus is to make sure that we integrate and make the successful platform delivered and make the customer successful.
Fantastic. Ashok, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about these 2 exciting acquisitions. Congratulations to you. Congratulations to the whole digital AI team, as well as the team from the new companies.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alan. Thanks again, and have a safe this thing. And enjoy all your shows. I think it's a fantastic type of topics.
We're trying.
Relevant.
It keeps us busy, Ashok. But again, thank you. We'll have you on soon. Congratulations, Ashok Reddy, CEO of Digital.ai, announcing their latest 2 acquisitions here on TechStrong TV. We'll be right back in a moment with our next guest.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Our next interview features Alon Gramansky. I first met Alon way back in maybe 2011 or 12. He had started a company called BlazeMeter, which was all about open source automated testing, what came to be known, I think, later on as continuous testing. And, as I got more into DevOps, and by 2011 or 12, I don't think I was aware of it yet. And, but as I got more into DevOps, of course, the whole continuous testing thing became a vital piece of the CI/CD pipeline and of the DevOps way. And BlazeMeter just grew right along with that and rode that wave. They were acquired by CA. And even after the acquisition by CA, BlazeMeter kept sort of a real independence. They're open source based, and they were never integrated into the rest of the CA DevOps portfolio as tightly as some of the others. And then, of course, CA was acquired by Broadcom, and they've gone through some branding and go-to-market strategies. But BlazeMeter still stays independent there. It's still under blazemeter.com. Of course, Alon left, though, some time ago, and along with some of the key folks he had at BlazeMeter, they've been working on a stealth project which recently emerged. They haven't announced funding yet. Doesn't mean they haven't gotten funding yet, but they haven't announced funding yet. And the new company is called Up9, and that's at up9.com. And it really is, it's a bolder vision, I think, than BlazeMeter has. It's about creating an entire automated testing platform that goes from everything from designing and architecting what tests you should have and the tests themselves to the running of the test and the analysis and analytics of these tests. It's a bold vision, and but Alon and his team, I think, have the experience now and chops and street cred to make it happen. Let's now go to my conversation with Alon, and you could hear for yourself all about up9.com.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment for TechStrong TV. My guest today is an old friend of mine. His name is Alon Geramanski. Alon was actually the founder of BlazeMeter. You might have heard of BlazeMeter. One of the real successes in open source, continuous automated testing that kind of powers a lot of the DevOps and CI/CD processes. Alon, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. It's great being here. And as you said, we have a long history together. So.
Yes. Actually, I remember when I first met you, BlazeMeter was just really starting to take off. And then, man, did it really took off. But we're not here to talk about BlazeMeter. Just when you thought you were out, they've pulled you back in, and you're now announcing and you've announced a new company you're starting called Up9, and we are thrilled to be able to talk to you about it and bring it to our audience. So first of all, congratulations on Up9. Second, what is Up9?
Thanks, Alan. Thank you very much. Up9 is basically, it's a solution to a problem. Right, and kind of when we were, and basically it does relate somewhat to BlazeMeter because it's my VP of engineering from BlazeMeter, it's my chief scientist from BlazeMeter, and we as a team, we saw over the years a problem that developers have, and we say, hey, we can fix it, we can find a solution, and and we started Up9. And the problem is, think of actually of the past 10 years when everything was shifting to the left. Remember, testing shifts left, right? And we were part of that movement. And we have shifted testing to the left to developers, but we didn't consider the workload this will add to their existing workload. They are developers, they're building products, right? And now they have to do testing as well. So we said, hey, we can complete the automation of testing, reduce the workload, and enable developers to basically to go higher in terms of reliability, but spend far less time and resources on testing. And this is basically what Up9 provides.
Got it. So let me play devil's advocate a little bit. I think you're right. With the shift left in testing, we wound up kind of putting more on the developers' plate than they had before, and they were already overworked probably, right? Before we put testing there. But the other thing I think that we've seen a lot come out of, let's call it a testing revolution with shift left and continuous and automated testing, is that a lot of people used to think that testers, the people doing testing, that it wasn't a profession per se, that it was sort of a way station, a stop along the career path to becoming a real developer, that no one wanted to be just a tester. Everybody wanted to be a developer, but they're doing testing now as they, progress. And I think what we have found, Alon, is that no, there is a class of professional testers, people who have been doing testing for 10 years, 12 years, more, 15 years. And they've rode this wave, especially with all the open source testing tools that BlazeMeter, so fabulously harnessed and leveraged, that there are experts here. And that when we try to say, well, we're going to take testing away from these people and put it in the developers, couple things. The developers, number one, were like, hey man, I'm trying to do code here. I'm not a tester, right? I'm a developer. I got stuff I got to do. And not that it was beneath them. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but that it wasn't, they already prioritized coding, right? Yep. And then number two, the more we try to automate, the more we realize what we should automate because we could and should, and the more we realize that even if we could, there are some things we shouldn't automate, right? Some things are better left to a human mind than just straight up automating. I'm wondering how that jives with your view of the world now at Up9.
Yeah, I think you raised some interesting points that have been with us for a decade. Okay, testing as a profession. Is it there? Isn't it there? Is this a byproduct of developers and testing? Is it a good match? Automation, where does it stop? So if I can address all 3 points, I think that testing is critical, right? I think that you can develop software from today to eternity. If there's no testing, this is, there's no testing, it will be poor quality, it will fail more times than it will be successful. Testing is critical to an organization, and testing is a profession, right? Like all of us can do some things to some level, but if you need an expert that knows what to test, how to test, and to be honest, the challenge is far bigger today than it was in the past. Okay, it's not like developers are as good as they were 10, 20 years ago, but the systems are far more complex, especially in microservices. Okay, so I think testing as a profession, not only that it's not going anywhere, it's not going away, it's going somewhere for sure. It's not going away, it's evolving, right? If you recall, there was the QA guy, and there was the QA engineer, and then there was the software developer in test, right?
Right.
And there'll be something in the future, I'm not sure what the name is, but in the same way that ops people are becoming developers, software developers, testers will also become software developers. They will program tests, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and by the way, we are trying to help that. Because if you look at the challenges, there's the pace of software. Software is going very fast, and it's going faster, right? So it's very tough for a human to keep up the same pace. And this is where we say, hey, maybe we need to do something else. Maybe it needs to go to developer, maybe, right? But if we have technology that can keep test in the same pace of software, everything's good, right? There's no compromise anymore. Okay, so here's where automation comes in. A chain is as weak as it, or as strong as its weakest link. Right? If you build automation and put a person in the middle, guess what? So what the automation is all about?
Right.
Okay, what Up9 does, it's complete the entire set of automation, from test planning, test creation and maintenance, execution, analysis, right? And everything needs to be instant, and you need to have complete coverage. So this is, if you're going to build an automation suite, you would do all that with people, with machines, with everything. So Up9 said, okay, I'm going to build you out of the box a test automation suite that has all ingredients. Still, someone needs to manage it, right? Someone needs to understand it's still a profession, a test profession. But if a tester now controls Up9, it can move probably faster than the pace of software. Okay,
that's pretty powerful, because the software today, the pace of the software, the pace of deployments, the pace of code being entered is outstripping our ability. Not outstripping our ability to deploy, because we still just seem to like to push that deploy button, right? But outpacing our ability to deploy with quality. And that's a problem, right? We see it day in and day out. So would you say that Up9 is, if you had to start BlazeMeter today rather than, what was it, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, it's what BlazeMeter would be if you were starting it today? In other words, that it addresses the same fundamental problem, or it's a different problem than what BlazeMeter was addressing?
No, yeah, it's a complete different problem, only because, back then, so BlazeMeter was a load testing cloud for cloud and everything. Back then in 2010, if you recall, BlazeMeter started in 2011, but back then it was the beginning of the public cloud, Amazon, virtual machines, stuff like that. So let's call it the SOA, or distributed services era, right? In 2020, if you look, things are completely, it's microservices, it's hybrid cloud, and the velocity and speed is far greater than it was in the past. So back then it was testing from the cloud, and today is automation, right? It's completing the automation loop, and for the modern technologies. So modern technology is a tech stack. It's probably a different person, a different developer, a different mindset. So we are solving the test automation problem for the next 10 years. And BlazeMeter is a great tool, I think, kind of the privilege to be part of, to be the founder of. But, it was amazing for, the cloud and services and whatever was back at the time.
Yeah. So when we look at Up9 and what you're describing, Alon, it's a very ambitious vision, right? We're gonna in essence build this test automation platform that is not going to just automate doing your tests, but it's going to automate the analytics. It's going to analysis. It's going to do all of these things. Of course, platforms aren't built in a day. Where are you now with this, and kind of where's that roadmap heading?
Yeah, it's a big vision, because we kind of, when we started, we say, okay, we have a clean slate. We understand the industry. We understand the problem, and we have the luxury of building the accurate and right solution for this day and age. Having said that, automation is not like something new. But if you think about it, yeah, we've been able to automate the execution part of things, right? A lot of things, but still there's heavy lifting from the person, and we are completing the automation and mostly focusing, because we kind of have solved the execution part. How about the test creation and maintenance? That's a real problem.
Yeah.
And if you bake that with microservices and Kubernetes and Docker and ECS and tools like that, there's nothing out there, right? So the vision is, let's complete the automation cycle from planning to analysis, right? For modern based technologies. And we've released a first version of the product a couple of months ago, and the product is functioning very well. So what it does, although it holds a big promise and it will do a lot more in the future, but today it completely covers test creation, maintenance, CI level execution, analysis, root cause analysis, and I'll be happy if you'd like to show you some, the system in action. But for integration testing, for microservices, we can actually deliver on that promise.
Got it. Excellent. So you mentioned the platform's been out a few months. Two questions. And forgive me that I don't know this off the top of my head. Have you announced funding or anything for Up9 yet?
No, we haven't announced.
Okay. We'll leave it at that.
Let's stop there. Exactly.
Yeah,
You'll
we'll
be
stop
the
right
first. Yeah, you'll be the first one to when.
All right. Secondly, in terms of an open source, when you start mentioning things like microservices and Kubernetes and all of this, of course you got to think cloud native, right? Yep. And really, I mean, what powers a lot of the cloud native is of course open source technologies like Kubernetes, but so many other. I mean, there's so many open source projects, ones that are CNCF or CDF. I mean, there's Linux, there's the Cloud Foundry. I mean, there's a bunch. How is UPN leveraging open source? Is UPN itself an open source? Is there a free version? Talk to us about that. I mean, because BlazeMeter was, so built on top of open source. Was, hand in hand.
Yeah, I think open source is a culture, and this is part of the industry. If back in the day it was a poor man's solution, today it's kind of it's the default, and something that you build upon. And our entire team is built on open source contributors, right? And the way I've worked in BlazeMeter, and in the same way we'll do it today, we are building software. For the past year, we were like 10 people or so, and now we're bigger than that, but we were building and building and building under stealth mode, because as you said, this is not an easy challenge to solve. And I'm happy to say that, we've put something in the market today that solves a segment of the solution. But related to open source, we are building when it is mature, we then put it on open source, right? We don't just develop, say, hey, it's open source, no value. When we see value, when people ask us, we want to use this, we want to customize this, we want to increase this, then we definitely deliver parts of the technology to open source. From my history experience, it worked very well for us. So it's definitely coming. And yeah, of course, there is a free version. The idea is to start to get to get a sense of the value, and then when you see that it does add value to your organization, then obviously we're a commercial business, so we have a pricing kind of a licensing and stuff like that. But to start with, of course, there is kind of a free tier.
Excellent. Forgive me, I didn't even give you a chance. Up9, where for people to get information at the website, whatever. What's the website for Up9?
I believe in simplicity, so think of up9.com. That's it.
up9.com. It's good that you were able to get that. That's fantastic. So there is a free version. Where are you in terms of community adoption, community kind of pickup? What do you hear? You're not a stranger to the testing world. You have a lot of friends, a lot of followers. What are you hearing from the people who have, had a chance to take Up9 for a test drive and use it a bit?
Yeah, if you would have asked me this 4 months ago, I would tell you I don't know, because we were in stealth mode and kind of still researching and developing. But lately, as I said, we've released the product. I think what I'm hearing is as follows. First, the problem is critical, meaning if there is a solution out there that can help testing, can alleviate the heavy lifting, the pain, and reduce not only the time frame, but also the workload, people, they love it. They tend to be, does it work? It sounds like magic. I keep telling them, listen, this is automation. There's no magic. If you can do it yourself, we can do it. If you cannot do it, we probably cannot do it, right? But in all likelihood, if you are following best practices, we can reduce the time frame, we can reduce the workload, and you'll get more coverage faster. Okay, so it's a critical need. For whatever reason, And it makes sense. People see it as magic, but it's not magic. It's automation. And to be honest, people are kind of surprised to see how much we invest in testing, right? This is not, we provide observability for test, observability in test, okay? Not for ops, not for SREs, right? For testers or developers that are doing testing, observability only for them. The code goes to GitHub, right? To your GitHub. It's your code. There's nothing more open source than that. It is created with Apache 2 license. So the code is yours. The test code is yours. You can do it without us. So if in the past we've created JMeter scripts, but we were dependent on JMeter and there was a tool, now we create code, right? You can run tests in code. So we invest a lot. So testing can be, again, stronger, faster, and not be considered kind of a second-class citizen.
Excellent.
So yeah, this is kind of what we hear.
Excellent. Alon, we're out of time. I tell you, we try to keep them to 20 minutes. We're over. But listen, I want to, first of all, congratulations on Up9. It's great to see you back out here in the space. You're doing what you do best. And I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more from you and the Up9 team in the months to come. You know you're always welcome to come here whenever you want and keep us posted, right?
For sure, for sure.
All right.
Ellen, I appreciate it. Thank you. Again, it's kind of since 2011, you know, I remember last time, I think it was 2018 we've met a couple of years ago in one of the shows. So I'm really happy.
Oh, no, I think was it 2018? I think I met you way before the CA.
Oh, yeah,
deal.
2011. We started
2011 is when
yeah.
I was going to say, yeah. I'm not that old. But anyway, Alon, congratulations. Keep up the great work. We'll be in touch. Up9 at up9.com. That's up9.com. Check it out. You know what? The team, the idea, I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
In this next segment, we're going to go back to the archives, again to TechStrong Con, our conference virtual event that we just held a couple weeks ago. And we had 50 speakers there, so you're going to be seeing a lot of content from TechStrong Con. But this one is really really one of the best from TechStrong Con. It features Cornelia Davis. If you haven't heard or seen Cornelia speak, you're in for a treat. She's just really bright, gets it, and has stayed on top of the space here. You will, well, I think I'm going to let Cornelia speak for herself. I don't think I would even do her justice in building up. Cornelia is all about GitOps these days, and if you may have heard the term GitOps, you may not be sure of what it is. But in this session, Cornelia is going to give us a behind-the-curtain look at what GitOps is actually and why it's important to you. I really, it's an hour long, I'm going to tell you up front. Well worth your time, though. Please check it out. Cornelia Davis on GitOps.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the TechStrong Con. It is so great that in spite of these times where we are all sequestered at home, that we have the opportunity to get together this way and share ideas and collaborate in spite of the challenges that we're faced with. And thank you so much for the TechStrong team for making this possible. I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm looking forward to chatting with many of you in the Slack channel behind the scenes. So what I want to talk about today is GitOps. Yes, if you have your buzzword bingo card out, you can go ahead and fill in that square, because GitOps has definitely become a term that is buzzword bingo worthy. But what I want to do today is I want to really talk about what it is, and more importantly than that, what is the value that it can bring, the business value that it can bring to an organization. So let me set the stage to start. In setting that stage, I'm going to start with this basic, in IT stack diagram. As we all know, that it used to be the case that when we were going to bring a new application online, we had to start many, many months in advance, and we had to procure hardware, and then we had to rack and stack that hardware and layer everything up on top of it, and there weren't necessarily clean boundaries between those layers. And then, of course, virtualization came along, and we were able to abstract away one layer of that. That's kind of the gray box on the bottom. And then increasingly, we started to build platforms on top of that. And yes, the Kubernetes logo there is intentional. These days, really, to a large extent, the platform of choice for a great number of people is Kubernetes. And then this allows us then to again, have an abstraction and a layer of separation between the application and everything that needs to be done to build and run that application in production. We have now these layers of abstraction. Now, if we assume that kind of basic structure with these basic layers of abstraction, let's think about the developer and operations lifecycle for software. So we have a developer, and that developer is cutting source code and checking it into a source code repository. Very, very mature already is CI technology, and that CI technology is going to run some pipelines that automatically on Git check-in or some source code check-in are going to run some tests, maybe some unit tests, maybe some level of integration tests. And these days it's going to generate an artifact. And again, these days that artifact is increasingly some type of a container image, a Docker image, OCI image, something like that. Where we start talking about GitOps is that not only are we going to use something like Git or a source code control system to store the application code that we then build into an artifact, we are also going to increasingly store the application configuration in a Git repository or something like that. Now that we have our application configuration and the application artifacts that are the things that we're going to deploy, we can use some kind of a GitOps-driven continuous delivery process to deliver that application into our runtime environment. Now, there's an awful lot of white space left on this slide, so let's go ahead and fill that in. As it happens, this process that I'm talking about lives over on the platform side as well, so lives beneath that application layer, application abstraction. So when it comes to managing the platform, and it's become very, very common for us to talk about managing platform as a product, just like we manage applications as a product. If we're managing application or platform as a product, we have a platform engineer. Now, if that platform that they're managing is Kubernetes, we also have developers of Kubernetes. So we've got Kubernetes contributors that are checking code into a source code repository. There's a release process, there's a CI and release process that goes through, does the testing, integration testing, generates the artifacts. Those artifacts themselves make up a Kubernetes cluster. So we've got a whole bunch of images that make up the Kubernetes capability. Now, when it comes to making Kubernetes available in your organization, your platform engineer is going to make the decisions around the configuration of Kubernetes, and they're going to store that configuration in a Git repository. Now, what we're going to do is a GitOps-driven continuous delivery process to deliver that actually into the infrastructure so that the platform gets established. But it goes beyond that as well. It's not only the core Kubernetes, because core Kubernetes doesn't really have enough to support the application tier above. We need all sorts of other components. And those components are being built by a component developer. So those are components like Prometheus, Grafana, Flux, Weave Cloud, Weave Net, some of the products that my company works on. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Now, that component developer, of course, is following that fairly traditional CI and release process, checking their source code into Git repository. And of course, because we're targeting Kubernetes here, that release process generates, a whole bunch of OCI images that have things like Prometheus, Grafana, and those types of things in it. Now, the platform engineer, again, is responsible for ultimately deploying those things. So they store that component configuration in a Git repository, and then they you guessed it, use a GitOps-driven CD process to deploy that into the platform. What I'm getting at here is that this platform team experience and this application team experience have very common patterns. And so the first punchline here is that when I'm talking about GitOps, I'm not just talking about GitOps for the application or GitOps for the platform. I'm actually talking about GitOps as a general pattern. Now, one more thing about these personas that's very important is that the application team and platform team, they each, even though the patterns are very similar and they're both going to be using things like GitOps and they're both going to be realizing value from the use of GitOps, they do have slightly different goals, and keeping those goals in mind is also very important. The application team is responsible for moving fast. They're responsible for, with very short feedback loops, iterating on their software, delivering it to their customers, getting feedback, and iterating again. And they want to move as quickly as possible. And in the past, they weren't able to move that quickly, in part because the process of deploying things into production was a rather lengthy process, because you had to address concerns like security, compliance, IT was managing costs and all of those types of things. And today, where we're releasing code several times a day, it's not that those concerns have gone away. Those concerns are still there, but they're being addressed by the platform team increasingly. And so we will start to touch upon those things as we go through the remainder of the conversation. So that was kind of level setting. Let me tell you what we're going to cover in the remaining time of our remaining time together. I am going to take just one very quick slide to tell you who I work for. I work for a company called Weaveworks, and I do want to tell you a little bit about what we do. But that's really very minor, just to give you that context. The bulk of the conversation is going to be around what is GitOps. And it's really the principles, some of the mechanics, and then I want to talk a little bit about what do we GitOps? And there's the punchline, all the things. And then I want to spend the latter half of our conversation really focusing on the business value of GitOps. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about myself so you know who I am. I have been in the industry for about 30 years. I am a trained computer scientist, so both in undergraduate and graduate school as well. And when I entered the workforce, I was a developer. And you'll notice there that says in parentheses, I wasn't ops. Now, there's a little bit of a longer story, but when I first started working on application platforms, maybe about 7 years ago or so, I was working on Cloud Foundry. I was at Pivotal at the time, and I, at the time, believed everything I read about platform as a service, that it was all about the developer, until I went out and I started working with our Pivotal customers. And it wasn't more than a month or two into my new gig that I realized that, in fact, what we were doing was that we were doing development with operations in mind. And that platform as a service was really about streamlining that operations process as well. So while I say I wasn't ops, I definitely consider myself a developer and an operations person. I guess you could call me a DevOps person. I've been working in web architectures for more than 15 years. I've been working in cloud native and in in Cloud Foundry for 8 years. We didn't call it cloud native back then. We were talking about platform as a service. We were talking about microservices and those types of things. And it wasn't until some time later that cloud native kind of emerged as a common pattern. And speaking of cloud native, one of the other things that I have done more recently is about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I released a book that I wrote with Manning called Cloud Native Patterns. And Cloud Native Patterns is a book targeted at the application architect and the application developer to help them understand the software architecture patterns that make software run well in the cloud. And the cloud I like to describe as being highly, highly distributed and experiencing constant change. The infrastructure itself is changing all the time, as well as the software itself. Now, as I move into the topic of GitOps, I'll come back to the notion of cloud native because it applies to not just these microservice patterns. And the patterns that I'm talking about are things like retries, circuit breakers, service discovery. Those are all the things that I cover in the book. And by the way, just a short self-serving comment on the side there is you'll notice that there's a discount code of 40% off. If you go to manning.com and you get the book there, you can use this code, the TechStrong code that you see there on the screen, to get 40% off of the book. And I would be so honored if you were interested in that. Okay, without further ado, one more very short commercial, and that is the company that I work for. At the beginning of this year, in January, I started with the company Weaveworks. Weaveworks is the company that, in fact, coined the term GitOps. And there's a great story behind it in that we were running our own Kubernetes-based service as a SaaS service on the cloud. In doing that operations, we were adhering to the patterns that have become GitOps now. We were doing those things ourselves because they were providing us value. And we had a system outage. Our SaaS service went down, and we were able to recover it completely in, a matter of 20 or 30 minutes. And it's because of the patterns that we had employed in creating and operating that SaaS platform. And it was that epiphany, that was in that moment that we said, these patterns could actually be useful for a larger audience. And that was really how this GitOps area was born. We are a mid-stage startup with some good backing, that, as you can see there. We partner with all of the major clouds, and you can see there that we are heavily committed to open source. My colleague and CEO, Alexis Richardson, who is the person who coined the term GitOps, was a founding member of the CNCF as well, and sat on the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee, for, the first 4 or 5 years of the tenure of the CNCF. We also have lots and lots of projects that are out in the open source, everything from the interface to EKS. As I said, we partner with companies, as well as some key components for the GitOps, things like Flux and what we call the Helm operator, as well as some of the components that you can use to run your workloads and run your clusters particularly well, things like Cortex, which is a scale-out Prometheus service, and so on. So enough said about that. What I want to do now is jump into the main program here. And we're going to start out with, what is GitOps? So one of the definitions, the main definition that we use, is that GitOps is a set of modern best practices for deploying and managing cloud-native infrastructure and applications. And under cloud-native infrastructure, we include cloud-native platforms as well. So this is all about using a set of best practices and some tooling, and we'll talk about that tooling, to support the operations of everything in that stack that I showed you earlier. In short, what GitOps is cloud native operations. So just like when we started building microservices and we needed a set of cloud native patterns to help us manage those microservices, now that everything wasn't in one process, we had to deal with things like service discovery and retries, because we know that the network is flaky. So we know that we need to compensate for that. Similarly, we have to compensate and come up with new patterns for operations. And that's exactly what we've done with GitOps. Now, before I dig more into what GitOps is, I want to start out with what GitOps isn't. Now, this is a picture that we saw earlier, which is the developer that in the DevOps engineer, they're using Git to store their source code, kick off their CI process, store their application configuration, which increasingly is the latter is YAML and the former, again, gets created into the artifact, which is an OCI image. And if our target runtime is Kubernetes, we might be tempted to just say, well, gosh, the delivery process, that GitOps-driven CD process that I mentioned earlier, can't we just, at the end of our CI process, push this thing into Kubernetes? I mean, after all, I've got my YAML that's stored there, and that YAML is the language of Kubernetes. Can't I just, like I said, in the last step of CI, push this out to a Kubernetes cluster? And the answer is no. So if we start with continuous integration, and I'll explain why the answer is no in just a moment. So continuous integration is something that, frankly, we're not mucking with. So GitOps is not trying to go in and trying to reinvent continuous integration. This is something that's been under development for at least a decade, probably closer to 2 decades. And that's quite mature, and it's working extremely well so that developers can just stay in their IDE, they can check into their source code repository, tests are automatically run, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is quite mature. And so again, the question is, can't I just do this? Can't I just, after I've checked in something into GitHub, do a deploy, and as a part of, after doing that deploy, do the test, get the feedback into the IDE, and so on? And again, I've already said no. Well, why is that? Well, there's a number of reasons. Number one, in certain environments, regulated environments, for example, there's a strict separation of concerns. Developers, they release artifacts, they do not touch production. Operators, they touch production. And by the way, the operators, they're not doing anything in development because you need to have that separation of concerns, because we don't want one party to really have the keys to everything, so that they can either inadvertently or deliberately introduce some type of a vulnerability. The next thing is, very much related to that, is that the CI process really shouldn't have keys to production. That's kind of putting the CI process, putting them into kind of God mode, if you will. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. The other thing to notice is that particularly now, where we are operating in the cloud, you typically have many, many deployment environments. So you're not just deploying to one area. Certainly you're deploying to different areas throughout your software delivery lifecycle. So dev, test, staging, production. But even in production, you're generally not deploying to only a single production environment. You're deploying to multiple production environments. Even if it's an active passive, you have things in multiple data centers because you can't tolerate downtime anymore. It's not okay if you have an electrical storm somewhere and it takes out power to one data center, that your customers are going to understand that they can't access their bank balance. They expect that to be up 24/7, regardless of what kind of catastrophe is happening in the world. And then finally, recreating a deployment. Let's say you've had a catastrophe and you need to reestablish a deployment. You shouldn't have to go all the way back to your CI process. Of course, you could build a CI process where you have flags and you say, oh, don't actually rebuild, or you might say, well, nothing's changed in the source code repository, so those things are no ops. But tightly coupling the CI process to the deployment process really can get very, very complex. And so what we're talking about here is we're actually talking about loosely coupling the continuous integration process from the continuous deployment process. And to give you a little bit of a foreshadowing of where we're going to go in just a moment, it's not only the deployment process, but it's also the operational process. So the punchline of all of this is that GitOps is not equal to Git delivery. We've also got the Git operations process at the back end. And I promise that we'll get into the details of that and start to explain it. Now, I mentioned earlier that GitOps wasn't just about a particular technology. I mentioned that there were principles of GitOps. So let's think about those principles. Let me cover those principles here. They really are summed up very well across these 4 different angles. I'm going to start at the bookends of this. On the left-hand side, you see that it says the entire system is described declaratively. What that means is that we do not have imperative scripts. We do not have bash scripts that we have to execute to establish a particular environment. We describe it declaratively, meaning, hey, here's an expression of what I want running. That's it. Now, how do I actually get that running? Well, that's the other end. That's the other bookend of this slide on the far right-hand side. And that is we have software agents that are going to ensure that that make it so, that are going to ensure that what we actually have running out in the systems, in the target systems, matches what we've described declaratively. Now, this pattern a few years ago, 5 years ago or so, was still pretty new and novel. But this is something that Kubernetes has served, if nothing else, and it's done quite a bit else. It has certainly made the entire industry aware of this eventually consistent model, where we describe our desired state, and there's some type of tooling that happens on a continuous loop that is constantly making sure that what you've asked for in your desired state is what matches the actual state. So those are two very important principles of GitOps. Now, the next one over from the left is that desired state that you've described declaratively is going to be checked into a source code control system. And that might be Git. Now, in this talk, I'm not going to trade off Git versus something else. I have a whole nother talk that I do where I talk about things like the Git semantics and the importance of those. But for now, as we're staying at this relatively high level, let's just talk about it in terms of Git. So the whole thing's versioned in Git. And now what we need is we need an ability to control the delivery of that declared state, that desired state, into the runtime that's actually going to make it so. And that's where that automatic application comes in. That's really where the continuous delivery comes in. Now, these are the 4 principles, and we're going to go through these in more detail in a moment. But I want to show you another version of that slide where I've highlighted some other terms. So originally I had everything highlighted in red. Now I've emphasized some other words. On the left-hand side, it's the entire system. It's not only that you're declaring part of the system, but really you achieve the most efficiencies when you do apply this principle to the entire system. It's not only that you're deploying things into Git, but it's that they need to be versioned. And the particular way that Git does versioning is extremely valuable to GitOps. When I talk about the system here is really talking about 2 things. It is the system that's running the GitOps process. I like to call that the GitOps runtime. And then there's also the system in which your desired state will be running. In the 3rd column, you can see there that I had highlighted automatically applied, but now I've also additionally highlighted system. By system, I'm just drawing your attention to the fact that there's a system which is going to run the GitOps process. I like to call that the GitOps runtime, and we won't talk about that too much today. But I also want to point out that the system is also referring to the target where your desired state is going to be running. I've been talking about Kubernetes so far, so you might be thinking, yeah, it's applications that are deployed into Kubernetes, but in fact, you can gain a lot of value in applying GitOps practices and these principles to targets other than Kubernetes. So for example, you could use a GitOps process to manage the resources that you're putting into a content delivery network, for example. So that's why I'm highlighting system. And then finally, I've highlighted closed loop at the end there. And notice that the first part of this phrase says that software agents ensure correctness and perform actions on divergence. Those actions could be automatic reconciliation, so bringing things back into alignment, or it could be that in fact there was some type of a process that was evolving what was happening in the runtime system, and we want to capture that because that was valuable. Let's say horizontal pod auto scaling, for those of you who know Kubernetes, like automatic scaling of something, we may want to capture that and bring it all the way back into the source of our declarative configuration. Like, oh, we've had a spike in traffic, so we've doubled our capacity. you might want to capture that back in the Git system at the back end. So we won't go into all of these details, but I wanted to highlight those so that you have an idea of where we're going with GitOps. Now, here's another diagram that we are very fond of using, which is to point out, again, as a summary, what we have is we have the continuous integration process, which is well established. And then we have a continuous delivery and operations practice, GitOps practice, on the right-hand side. Now, I've just expressed all of that in very much an abstract way, very much principles. What I want to do now is get a little bit closer to the mechanics. So let's see what a workflow might look like, a GitOps workflow would look like. So the first thing is I'm going to start out with Git. And in Git, I have a version history of my declared desired state. And that's capturing the entire system. Okay. Now, one of the things that's important about Git here is that at each node in the history, I have the entire state of the system. And that turns out to be extremely valuable. That means that I don't have to rebuild it. I've got the entire state. Now, you'll notice there that I've also depicted a number of different version histories, and that will become important later on when we start to drill into the details. We also have repositories, like in this case, I'm showing Harbor, or it might be Docker Hub, or it might be JFrog's Artifactory, or something along those lines. I have the entire system expressed in repositories. So I don't have a file share somewhere that some operator is pulling from, and they're renaming things and those types of things. And there are some versioning. That's why version history here is on the slide. There are some implications around things that you need to do with versioning. Once we have that entire system, we have a composition and synchronization process. And that is really kind of that delivery part of the continuous operations and continuous delivery and operations. And what that does is it will do some level of composition. It also does things like fills in parameters. So if you're familiar with things like Helm or Customize, it's going to fill in values for a particular environment. And then we have the delivery that is going to happen, that composition and synchronization delivers things into the GitOps runtime. And then in the GitOps runtime, we have these software agents that are maintaining the correct state on the right-hand side. Now, you'll notice there that I've now called out specifically that I'm not only targeting Kubernetes as my target runtime, but I also might be targeting virtualized infrastructure like cloud infrastructure or physical infrastructure or content delivery networks or identity systems or et cetera, et cetera. Now, if we remember before that we had this picture when I was setting the stage at the beginning of the hour, well, that part that I referred to as GitOps driven CD is really just this part. But GitOps includes that latter part as well, continuous operations. So what we have is we have this picture where on the left-hand side we have continuous integration, and then on the right-hand side, GitOps is made up of a number of services that help us in delivery, composition, synchronization, those types of things, and then a number of services that help us keep things running. So if we then go back to this picture and we fold those things together, delivery and operations is what we call GitOps. And so here's my definition. GitOps is equal to continuous delivery and continuous operations, or CD plus CO. And by the way, it also places some requirements on continuous integration as well. And those things have to do to a large extent with the versioning semantics that I was hinting at earlier. So for example, to be very pragmatic, when you're putting things into your Docker Hub or your container registry, please do not use the tag latest. Have your tags be write once, because then you can leverage tags to implement that important semantic, which is immutability. But I won't go into that in more detail. So to sum this up, we're getting close to the finishing up the first half of our conversation here, is that I want to emphasize again that it's principles. It's not specific technologies. Now, it's true that the logos that you see here on the screen are the ones where GitOps is perhaps most frequently applied today. And that is that you're declaring your desired state in YAML, you're storing it in Git, you're using something like Flux to do that automatic delivery into the GitOps runtime, which is running on Kubernetes, and your applications, your target environment is also Kubernetes. And so this is a very common configuration. But in fact, you might want to start expressing your declarative configurations in a number of different languages. And there's some really interesting work that's been going on out in the industry around that, in using things like TypeScript or Python or any kind of like JavaScript type of language to do that declarative description. And there's some advantages to doing that. There are some ways that you can use languages, these programming languages, to do things like inheritance or to be able to apply parameters across a number of different files. So I mentioned earlier that you might be using Helm or Customize to instantiate parameters for the various runtime environments. Well, there are some ways of doing that in object-oriented languages that really make things very good. And there are some projects out there. For example, Amazon has a project called CDK8s, which is in fact the reason that I pulled out the TypeScript and the Python logos, because those are the two languages that they support in that today. So it gives you a way to you're not allowed to go off and start using imperative processes, but it allows you to declare, if you will, objects. And then those objects, if you remember, we have that YAML compilation process, that instantiation, composition, and delivery process, then that can happen as a part of it. In terms of the repositories that we store things in, of course, we already have image registries. I've already been talking about those. But what about something like an S3 bucket, or even existing enterprise systems that you might have that you're using for some level of configuration control today, something like ServiceNow? So again, we have to be very, very careful there, because the GitOps process works best when it has certain things like immutability and version histories in those repositories, and we may have to tool that up ourselves. But from a principles perspective, we can absolutely integrate into some of the existing IT systems that you have today. In terms of automatic delivery, I'm not going to drill in on that. I'm just going to somewhat self-servingly stick with Flux there, because that's the thing that we use the most at Weaveworks. But then again, I also mentioned at the end that we have the various target environments, and I mentioned that on the previous slide as well, that we can be deploying into lots of things. So again, to sum it up, what is GitOps? GitOps is about continuous delivery, continuous operations, and it's about cloud native operations, where you do need continuous delivery and continuous operations. All right. With that, I am now going to turn to the latter half of our conversation, which is why? What's the value that I'm going to get out of this anyway? Sounds like cool technology. And yeah, you can probably immediately see that there might be some benefits. For example, it might make things easier for the developer. Certainly, it's with my emphasis on things like version history and things like that, it's pretty easy to see that, gee, if I have the entire version history, maybe it'll be easy for me to go back to what I had before by simply going back one step or 5 steps in my version history and those types of things. And yeah, maybe at a high level, you're thinking, okay, well, that'll maybe allow me to do multiple clouds and things like that. But what I want to do is I want to drill into it in further detail. Now, the mechanism where I want to drill into it in further detail is I'm going to start with some existing work. This is not my work, but this is work that somebody else has already done, and I'll get to that punchline in just a second, that has tied certain IT behaviors and metrics that can be measured that give you an indication of how well those IT practices are being followed. and tying those measurements directly to business outcomes. Many of you are probably guessing already where I'm headed with this, and yes, you would be right. This is the work that DORA has been doing, or the DevOps Research Assessment Organization. If you don't know it by the acronym or by that name, you probably know it by the State of the DevOps report. So DORA is an organization that was created by Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, and Gene Kim. And they have for a number of years been publishing the State of the DevOps report, which does this. It actually applies scientific methods to correlate certain IT behaviors with business outcomes. What you see on this slide, which is a diagram that was taken out of the 2019 State of the DevOps report, is across the top, you see elite, high, medium, and low performing organizations. Now, those organizations are given that title based on exactly the things that you would expect. The highest performing organizations are the ones that have the greatest market share, that are gaining market share, that are profitable, that have the highest net promoter scores, etc. And the lowest performing organizations are those that are losing market share, that are losing money, that are losing customers, that have unhappy customers even if they're locked in. So that's across the top. And they've studied, again, these IT practices, and they've come up with 4 specific measures that correlate wonderfully with these high to low performing organizations. And we'll go through those very briefly here. Number 1 is deployment frequency. It shows, their research shows, that high performing organizations release code far more frequently than low performing organizations. As you can see, they're releasing on demand or multiple times per day. So deployment frequency is something that you shouldn't just be aiming for because it sounds good. It's actually correlated to business outcomes. The second thing is lead time for changes. This is the old code is complete and it takes me 6 weeks to get it out into production. That's not so good. So lead time for changes says, okay, I have something that's ready to be changed in production. How long does it take me to get that deployed into production? Again, you can see that the high performers are less than once a day. The low performers can take months. The third metric is, so those two are really kind of deployment process type of metrics. The other two have to do with more around the stability of the system. One is the time to restore a service. So if a service has experienced some kind of a problem, how long does it take you to restore that from some kind of a problem? And then finally, the last one is the change failure rate. So how often does making a change cause an outage in the first place? And you can see there that pretty amazing differences in numbers there. The elite performers, 0 to 15% of the time, making a change in your production environment, doing some type of a deployment causes a problem. Compare that with 60% on the opposite end. That's pretty dramatic. And in fact, here's another diagram that they have in the State of the DevOps report that shows you, and I'm going to pick the largest number here, is that the mean time to recover from incidents, the elite performers are 2,600 times faster than the low performers. So these are really great things to aim for. So they've done the work of tying these IT practices to business outcomes. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, I'll remind you that GitOps was this. And what I want to do now is I want to put those two things together. And in putting those two things together, what I'm going to start with is on the left-hand side here, you can see those measurable IT metrics. And on the right-hand side, you can see that there's some additional cross-cutting concerns, things like security, change control, regulatory compliance. That those things are kind of implicit in some of the things on the left-hand side, but I find it very helpful to continue thinking about those things as we go through the dialogue. Now, you'll also notice that I don't only have 4 things on the left, I have a 5th one, which is availability. And this is something that the folks in this State of the DevOps report call out as a special category. And I won't go into the details of why. We're just going to talk about these things as we go. And so what I want to do now is in the middle, I want to start taking some very specific things that you can do in your IT system. And for each one of those things, I'm going to tie it to GitOps. And so what you can see here is that I have 5 things that we're going to talk through, and they map to those things on the left-hand side as follows. Let's take application team productivity, for example. If you have productive application teams, that is, you're moving things out of the way that have historically plagued them from being able to do some of the behaviors that we know generate higher business outcomes, then what you're doing is you're looking for things that are going to allow them to reduce the lead time and increase their deployment frequency. And what I'm going to do in a moment is I'm going to go through this as well as 4 other categories and show you specifically how GitOps contributes to application team productivity. When GitOps contributes to that productivity contributes to lowering lead times and increasing deployment frequency. Another thing is that application teams that are autonomous are also able to lower their lead time and increase their deployment frequency. No longer are they dependent on somebody else to deploy something into production. And that's how we're getting to these massive differences, is that the app teams are able to do production deployments instead of having a ticketing process to do so. The third thing is that we want to implement some safety nets, and I'm going to show you exactly the safety nets that, at least a couple of the safety nets that the GitOps process provides. And when you have those safety nets, that allows you to feel a little bit more confident on deploying more frequently. Because if something does start to go wrong, there's a safety net to catch you, to keep you from doing something completely catastrophic. And that also, those same safety nets are going to decrease the change failure rate as well. Repeatability is absolutely essential. And that is, if you will, the first thing that people tend to think of when it comes to GitOps, is they think about repeatability. Now you'll notice that it's just the 4th thing on the list. Of course, it has an impact on deployment frequency, so that I can, for example, if it's just a simple repeatable process, if I'm pushing a button or doing a git push and that has the effect of automating the entire deployment, well, then I can do it very, very frequently. Because I've got that repeatability, which means that if something does go wrong while I'm doing my deployment, I can just repeat the previous deployment. That also plays a big role in reducing the change failure rate. And then it is the biggest thing in mean time to recovery. When I told the story of Weaveworks and how GitOps was born, it was exactly that. We suffered an outage, but because we had been putting these practices in place, our time to recovery was very, very short. And then finally, how do you get availability? Well, at the root of all availability is redundancy. So that how we surface that redundancy, of course, makes a difference. But if you want to be available all the time, you've got to have more than one of something. Gone are the days where we said, oh, we are going to make sure that this system never goes down, this system being a singleton. Instead, what we're all about is we are all about making sure that we have multiples of those. Okay, so let's drill into the application team productivity bucket then. And I'm going to continue going back to this diagram where I showed some of the mechanics earlier. I'm going to keep going back to this diagram over and over and overlaying some of the GitOps practices and overlaying the benefits of those GitOps practices against those metrics that I just talked about earlier. So if we take a look at this process, remember that the developer process is on the far left-hand side of this. We have the developer and the DevOps engineer. They're already familiar with things like Git, and they're familiar with things like CI process. And not only are they familiar with checking things into Git, but they're also familiar with some of the constructs that are available in Git in some of the Git offerings like GitHub and GitLab and Bitbucket and those types of things like a pull request. So they've been using pull requests to manage their source code control process. They are able to use those same constructs like a pull request in managing their application configuration. So now that change control process that we were talking about earlier that used to be file a ticket and then somebody in some other group goes ahead and does some review and things like that, they're taking that very important IT process and they're realizing it through familiar tools like the pull request. Those of you who know Git know that there's all sorts of other automation that can be tied to Git that do things like, okay, when it does come time for somebody to review that, do they have to go into some arcane web UI and click on some approval box or something like that? No, in many cases, it's just a matter of responding on a thread that is tied to a pull request with looks good to me, / looks good to me. And that has the effect of having a bot at the back end that pushes forward that process. So some of these processes that the development teams have been using, that they've become very efficient around, what we're doing with GitOps is we're saying, don't learn a whole new tool set. Don't have to install a whole new tool set. Just use the tool set that you live in and day out, and use that not only to manage your source code, but to manage your deployments as well, your application configuration. So what that allows us to do is that allows us to really constrain the world that the developer and the DevOps engineer works in. One of the things that's happened, and I've been working in the Kubernetes space for about 3 years now, is that developers, when they started working on Kubernetes, they had to start learning a whole bunch of Kubernetes. They had to learn about daemon sets and deployments and replica sets and config maps and secrets and all of those types of things. And what this does, in fact, is it allows the developers to maybe set up, if we go all the way back to that stack diagram that I showed at the very beginning, it allows developers to kind of live in that application space and not be concerned with all of the details. And so what we're going to do then is that the platform is going to automate everything else for them. Now, in a moment, I'll say a little bit more about how that platform automation happens. But really, what we're talking about here was application team productivity. And by constraining the world that they need to live in, and using tools they're familiar with, we absolutely increase their productivity, which contributes directly to a reduction in lead time and an increase in deployment frequency. Okay, so now let's move on to the next bucket, which is application team autonomy. And I'm going to take you back to this picture. These teams, even though they're using similar processes, and they are both technologists and they're both developers, they have different concerns. They have different surface areas that they're focusing on. Application team is all about the applications and iteration and feedback, and the platform team is all about making sure that that organization stays out of the negative headlines on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. We do not want an Equifax. We do not want any kind of other, Target breach or Home Depot breach or anything like that. We don't want to be on the front page. So that's what the platform team is responsible for. So the autonomy that I'm talking about here is, to a large extent, allowing the application teams to not have to go to the platform team for every step of the process. So how do we achieve that autonomy? Now, you remember this picture, right? And remember that I called out earlier that there were different version histories. So I'm going to expand that a little bit. Of course, the image repository is still there, but it's off the screen for a moment. We've got different version histories. What this picture allows us to do then is it allows the developer to stay here, and it allows the platform team to also apply the GitOps process for their side. Now, they're concerned with security and compliance, and it's those configurations that implement exactly the platform automation that is allowing the developers and the DevOps engineers to be more productive, that's shielding them from the details that are happening at the back end. So to sum this up, the platform engineer is responsible for all of the configuration that drives the platform and tooling the security and compliance regulations into that platform. And so let me give you a very concrete example. I was just chatting with a client recently where they have a security process where every single week they get a new version of the base operating system. Now, the base operating system, of course, in a Kubernetes environment is running on the host. What that means is that the platform engineer can simply make available a new machine image and have that deployed onto the hosts in the Kubernetes environment. And they go through and they do a rolling upgrade of all the nodes in the Kubernetes environment. Is there a reason that the developer needs to be involved? Well, that depends. If the developers are building cloud native applications that have been designed for these types of infrastructure quicksand, which again is what my book is all about, is those design patterns that allow you to do that, then the developer doesn't even need to know. The application team doesn't even need to know that this is happening. And there are organizations out there that have it implemented in this case. Now, if they have stateful apps, then there's other things that need to happen and it gets a little bit more complex. But in many, many cases, increasingly in the modern software that we're building today, we can do that. So that application team autonomy then allows them, of course, again, to reduce their lead time and increase their deployment frequency. Now, I'm going to say more about the platform engineer as we go on through the rest of the conversation and look at some of the other elements. All right, so next let's talk about safety nets. So if we go back to our schematic here, I'm sure that you can all pick out the first safety net. And yep, sure enough, it's that version history. Because every node, and I'm going to stick with Git as an example here, has the entire system stored. And this is something that I believe that the folks who created Git had a tremendous foresight, even if they weren't thinking ahead to application configuration. The fact that they weren't storing diffs, as happened with so many source code control systems before, means that you can very, very quickly go back and really, you're just changing a pointer. You do not need to replay a whole bunch of diffs to get to a state. You're really just shifting a pointer. And so that's what it means to just be able to roll back a deployment, is that let's say during a rollout process of some new piece of software, I have my application configuration in there. And let's say maybe it's not even that I've changed the artifact. Maybe the image is exactly the same. I'm just changing my configuration. For some reason, I apply that new configuration. I'm going through the process of doing that rollout. Everything goes fine, but then something goes belly up. And these types of things happen all the time. I very quickly want to go back to what had been stable yesterday. And to do that, it's really just a matter of changing a pointer in Git. You can change that pointer and then you can actually make that the change, so you can move the previous commit to be the head. So there's a question of, is it roll back or roll forward, and we don't need to get into the details of that. But the whole point is that I have expressed the previous version and I can roll back to that very, very easily. So that's one safety net, and you can imagine how that can give me a lot of confidence in rolling out deployments, and so I'm not going to be so scared. One of the reasons that deployments didn't happen very often before was that they were scary. And if I can make them less scary, then I'm more likely to do them more often. Now, there's a second place that safety nets show up in this diagram, which is right over here on the right-hand side. And that is, there is a notion called progressive delivery. That's a term that was coined by James Governor of RedMonk. And what progressive delivery says is that we are going to, instead of doing a full-scale replacement of version 1 of software with version 2 of software, what we're going to do is we are going to use things like traffic switching and traffic routing to start to send some traffic over to the new version. And that's going to be the proverbial canary. And we're going to keep an eye on that. And if things are going well, we will continue with that deployment. And if things start going haywire, then we will roll back to the previous deployment. Now, why have I painted this picture on the right-hand side? Well, that's because notice that what I just said. I said that it involves things like traffic switching and traffic routing. So that's something that's happening in your target runtime system. So when I talk about this category of software agents that are maintaining correct system state and alerting on divergence and things like that, something like a continuous delivery, progressive delivery process can be implemented in automation to be one of those agents that's running in the software system, responding to the desired state that's on the left-hand side, but doing so in a very safe manner. And I'll draw your attention to one of our open source projects. We have an open source project called Flagger, which implements exactly this. It's implemented as a Kubernetes controller, so you deploy it as an operator into your Kubernetes cluster, and then you get the benefit of this particular safety net. So when we have those safety nets, again, tying that back to the IT practices, the measurable IT practices, is that having those safety nets absolutely, again, is going to allow me to do more frequent deployments. And also, if I start to do a deployment and something goes wrong, I'm going to be able to very, very quickly stop that deployment. And so the deployment won't ultimately fail because I'll still have version 1 of the system running. And now all my traffic is going back to version 1. So that contributes directly to that. All right, we're almost done here. Let's talk about repeatability now. So repeatability, again, I'm going to go back to this diagram and let's see where repeatability comes in. First of all, remember that one of the principles of GitOps is that we have the entire system declared and stored in a version history. So I've put an asterisk here to just draw your attention to entire system. So if your system, you suffer some type of a meltdown and 50% of your system is declared and can be recovered through this GitOps process by simply reestablishing a GitOps runtime, reestablishing the target environment, pointing to the GitOps runtime to that target environment, and that GitOps runtime, of course, is also pointing to the repositories that are storing your versions in your entire state of the system, then it's just a matter of that automation going through and doing things. But if only 50% of your system is set up that way, and the other 50% requires some operator to go to this panel over here and drop this file over here and do this other thing over here, then your mean time to recovery is going to go through the roof. But if you have the more of your system that you have defined in using these GitOps principles, the more immediately and automatically recoverable you are. So that one's not a stretch at all. Now there's another element, and I'm going to draw your attention here, which is to this composition and synchronization. Now this picture shows the arrow going from left to right. And in fact, if I had a moment, I would update this picture very quickly. But in fact, it also has this little blue arrows going in both directions. And that's what I've put the asterisk on right now, which is to say, okay, well, wait a minute. If I start to get some drift in my system, and here's my little icon, here's my either intentionally bad actor or my inadvertently bad actor who's coming in and doing something in the production system without having committed that into the Git repository. Now your system, your entire system, isn't captured in that entire system declaration on the left-hand side anymore. Your running system is in fact partially defined by something that somebody has done on the cluster manually. And what we call that drift. What that delivery process does is it's not only delivery, but it's actually a synchronization that guards from risk and identifies when there's been a drift, and then can do one of many things. It can either eliminate that drift and say, you know what, I'm just going to continually revert my system, my target system, back to what you have in the Git repository. And we have lots of people who are doing that automatically. And maybe alert at the same time, because if somebody is doing something that has the risk of causing drift, you want some alerts on that. Or maybe it doesn't do the automatic rollback, the reconciliation, but at the very least, it sends out an alert where somebody can come in and say, what the heck is going on? Who has keys to my target environment? So it might even just be, something that helps with security. So that is a way that that we contribute to those IT outcomes. Now, there's another IT outcome that I didn't have on the slide that I want to talk to here as well, and that is that our platform teams and our infrastructure teams are also responsible for keeping costs from spinning out of control. And there, what repeatability does to contribute to cost control is it basically says, if you think about why application teams hung on to environments before, was really a couple of reasons. One was it was hard to get those environments, and hopefully you're not too terribly plagued by that anymore. But even when that went away and it was easy to self-service an environment, they hung on to those systems because, you know what, the state of that system had some important information in it. If the state of your system is entirely captured in a Git repository, in a set of repositories, then that live cluster or that live target environment is no longer the only expression of that state. And so you will be much more likely able to get rid of those old environments because everything that's contained in those environments is contained in your Git repositories. So I have spoken with users who have implemented automatic harvesting of target environments that haven't been touched in a month because they have the GitOps process in place. And they know that their application teams have everything stored in their Git repositories. That's what allows them to recover some of that unused infrastructure, because in the event that the development team needs it again, the app team needs it again, they can just get it back. All right. So moving on to our final category here, which is redundancy. We know that redundancy is absolutely essential for providing availability. Now, if we go back to this picture, it's not going to be a stretch at all for you to see where I'm going with this. I'm just going to move a few labels around to make some space. But you can imagine here that not only am I doing this deployment into a single data center, but now I'm doing this deployment into multiple data centers. So I can consistently deploy the same environment from one environment, and it might not be different data centers, but different failure domains. Now, this is one of those places where composition is really important again, because part of what we're doing here is that these different failure domains aren't identical, right? They might have different IP ranges, or they might have some other configuration values that differ. And so as a part of the delivery process, we need to instantiate some of the templates that we have stored as a part of our entire system expression on the left-hand side. So this is an important part that really gets me redundancy. So to sum it up, those 5 different things that I talked through in the middle contribute directly to the measures on the left-hand side and even some of the cross-cutting concerns on the right-hand side. So that hopefully gives you a perspective on. I know that was an awful lot. And I'm delighted to be sitting on the Slack channel as you're watching this presentation, answering your questions. I also encourage you to reach out to me even after the fact, after the Slack channel is closed down or the conversation has died away. I would love to chat with you further about these conversations. There is so much more to GitOps than there seems to be. Like I said, it's not just the last step in CI. So let me sum up then for you what GitOps is and the value that it brings. First of all, it's a paradigm. It's a paradigm that's not tied to any singular technology, though tools are essential for realizing it. So when I talk about these practices, it's essential that you have reconcilers, both at the delivery level and at the operational level. It's essential that you have tools that allow you to store a version history so that you can just change a pointer to get a different deployment. So the tools and careful selection of tools is important, but it isn't a singular technology. You don't buy GitOps and just by buying, Git, for example. And GitOps applies to everything, not just the cloud native applications, but Kubernetes clusters. So we are GitOps and Kubernetes clusters, where you can have a declarative configuration of what you want your Kubernetes cluster to look like. We have the Git delivery process, and then the software agent that is keeping things, it is targeting infrastructure. It's not targeting Kubernetes, it's targeting infrastructure. And that reconciler, yep, you might be guessing it, is something like Cluster API. And all of this is with the goal of delivering real business value. And that's what we spent the latter half of the conversation talking about. So with that, I thank you for your attention. Again, it is so good to be here with you at TechStrong Con, and so good to be chatting with you in the back channel on Slack. And I look forward to chatting with many of you more in the future. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
I hope you enjoyed the Cornelia Davis segment from TechStrong Con. I thought it was fantastic, but I think a lot of what Cornelia does is fantastic. So I'm glad we were able to bring that to you, though. Let's now jump into the news, though. As usual, headlines from around our sites. Not meant to be exhaustive. There's a lot more there. Go check it out. But let me just give you a couple of the articles, a couple of the headlines that are on our sites for today. Let's start with Security Boulevard. 5 lessons learned from patching during a pandemic. I think this whole pandemic thing is serving as a giant laboratory on how to do remote, how to do patching, how to do development. And this is a good article as an example of that. Go check that out. Employees' reasons for not using secure communications. I hear them every day. Much like listening to salespeople, why they don't enter everything in CRM. The one thing, if we're going to be successful with our remote work teams, is we can't let the excuses get in the way of security for our secure communications. Ease of use, I get all of that, and speed, but we've got to keep up our security. So check that article out. Also on Security Boulevard, we have Netsurian extends its SIM service reach to employees working at home. Again, on that same theme of remote workers. And a big article, though, about Palo Alto extends firewall reach. Palo Alto is going to be coming out with firewalls that works on a cloud-based firewall in containerized environments. And I think there's a big thing for Palo Alto. I'll have someone from Palo Alto on next week's show to discuss that in length, but go check out the article for now. Up on Container Journal, we have the OpenStack Foundation extends Starling XX to Kata containers. And, OpenStack is still relevant out there, and interesting to see what kind of pickup that'll have. And then we also have Lotse open source project automates Kubernetes management. Check out the article, an open source project around Kube management. Over on DevOps.com, we have how DevOps can save your business from COVID-19. I don't know. I'm going to let you be the judge of that. But I will tell you that I think because of COVID-19, more companies are, moving to DevOps-based footing as part of their cloud transformations. Then we have fostering better collaboration between IT ops and security teams should be a top priority. This is over from our IT as code section on DevOps.com, and it's something I've been preaching for 5 years. So it's near and dear to me. Check that article out. Then we also have the CDF. That's the Continuous Delivery Foundation. Provides Spinnaker progress update. They're responsible now for managing the Spinnaker project. It was formerly Google and Netflix. And then, a highly touted open source cloud native company called Rookout looks to drive code understandability. If you haven't heard of Rookout, read the article and check them out. They're making some really great progress out there. So that's it for the news. Those are headlines from around our sites. Go check out. There's so much more on the sites, though. But do check out the articles we mentioned here. For now, though, it's that time on our show where we head over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. Charlene has 2 segments today. One is a great interview, and one is something new she's going to be starting, which is a webinar roundup, giving you a preview of some of the great webinars we have in store this week at Media Ops. So let's now head over to Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor, Media Ops. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, welcome back, everybody, to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with Kurt Sand, who is the Head of Automation at Broadcom. How are you, Kurt? Thanks for joining me.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So how you doing in these pandemic days?
Doing well. Family's healthy. It's most we can ask for in these days. All a little stir crazy, but that's always secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of things have changed in the business environment and, and at home too. But one of the things that hasn't changed is businesses need to push forward regardless of what's going on in the world. And I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about the concept of BizOps, because it's something that we've not really delved into too much on TechStrong TV, but I'm hearing it more often in the marketplace. And so wondering if maybe perhaps you can kind of walk me through what your definition of BizOps is and what we need, what's the big takeaway with it? Sure.
So I think a lot of us are probably more familiar with DevOps than the term BizOps at this point. But DevOps has really had a profound and continue to have a profound impact on the business by really taking down the silo between dev and ops, and of course, getting code out faster out of the application lifecycle into operations in front of customers. And we certainly are still focused on that and think it's a key set of processes. What BizOps really seeks to add to that is the business context so that you have business outcomes throughout it, right? We can all recognize that we can push software out faster that's of quality, but still not solve a business problem. And then we look back and say, why'd we do that? And we end up with waste, usually creating rework or even waste of missing opportunity, right? Because while you were building the wrong thing, somebody else might have been building the right thing. So BizOps really seeks to say, how do we integrate the business outcomes, the business point of view across the whole DevOps? Okay. All right. So really kind of putting context behind the work that folks are doing. This sounds maybe along kind of parallels value stream management or value stream. What's the other value stream? I don't know. I can't remember. Value stream management. Sure. So, because that I've heard, and I had discussions with folks who have told me that that also kind of puts context, the business context, to the business of DevOps, if you will. So, how does this help the business? How is this different? I mean, how are value stream management and BizOps different? Yeah, so I think there's parts that are related. I think the key though is, my view, value stream management really picks up assuming somebody already built the sound business case and then retains the context through the rest of the life cycle. Where BizOps says, hey, like for an example in this crazy changing world that we're in, where everyone's in massive reprioritization, how do you have the business leaders sit down with the technology leaders and actually rethink the business priorities, think the business cases out, the ROI out, the outcome out, and then kind of push it downstream where maybe value stream management would pick up.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So it's kind of a precursor, if you will.
It's a precursor and including maybe value stream management end to end.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Great. So one of the things that I've also been hearing, and you guys are kind of banging the drum, is this idea of value ops. What is value ops, and how does it fit into this whole BizOps paradigm?
Yeah. So, we really look at BizOps as three key domains, right? So there's the value ops domain, which I'll certainly answer your question in a second, the DevOps domain, and then AI ops. Mm-hmm. So in the value ops domain, what there's really been in itself two silos there, one around product portfolio management and strategy, separate from the agile execution. Okay. So first thing we're trying to do in value ops is take down that first silo of strategy and agile execution. Then it can move to DevOps in how we think of it, where we've done a really good job of breaking the silos down between maybe dev, test, and ops, really. Mm-hmm. And then on to AI ops, where the silos have traditionally been across the different infrastructure pieces, compute, network, storage, but then also make sure that we get feedback loops all around the way so that, for example, the customer experience is fed back as quickly as possible to the business, or any issues in production is fed back to DevOps. So we're constantly looking for these feedback loops throughout those domains.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So it sounds like we're almost breaking down the silos between the developer teams and the business side of things, and to kind of create this more holistic view of how what they're doing is not only benefiting the company, but benefiting customers and bringing that level of value back to the company so that they can go on and build even more value with future projects. Right?
Yeah, it really got started, I think, for a number of us that started deeply looking into this when we first saw some statistics about how bad the business outcomes that have been delivered from digital transformation projects are.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we tried to go backwards to figure out why is that. And it wasn't the lack of investment. There's an enormous amount of investment that was put into digital transformation, and it wasn't from a lack of effort. Mm-hmm. And it seemed to be the key was misalignment. And it was misalignment between line of business, DevOps, and the folks that are in the more pure operational roles. And as a result of that, they just were either not building the right things, not getting them out fast enough, and just not getting feedback loops from the customer experience back to the business.
Go ahead.
Oh, so I was going to give an example, like a retail store that we work with did an amazing job of pushing out tablets as opposed to like point of sale registers. Mm-hmm. And the speed at which they decided to do this and which they got it into the stores was phenomenal, but they realized the uptake of it was terrible. And they couldn't figure out why. And it was only once we instrumented the applications on the tablets and we figured out, for example, where the people working in the stores were actually getting lost in that customer journey, that we could go back and say, all right, it wasn't that you didn't try to digitally transform, but you really did it in a way that your end users just couldn't figure it out. So let's get a feedback loop of constantly pushing out not just changes, but changes that improve that customer journey.
Okay. All right. That makes total sense. And it really does kind of demonstrate that the whole value ops proposition as well. So.
Yeah. And it also, like when we met them, they were rightly very proud of how fast they did this and how fast they could make updates, but they just didn't know what to update.
Right.
To make it better. So they were going faster, but kind of blind.
So it sounds like BizOps is kind of an underpinning of digital transformation. I mean, they kind of go hand in hand. But do you think that, since so many organizations now are accelerating their digital transformation efforts in light of the pandemic and the fact that, now digital transformation is something that they really have to do to survive, basically. It's no longer one of those long-term, let's improve the business, but it's kind of a nice to have, but now it's actually a must have. But so do you think that, with that in mind, can business transformation occur without BizOps? And then alternatively, can BizOps occur without digital transformation?
For sure that we're focused here on digital transformation and how we perceive and deliver BizOps. I think it can happen without BizOps. It's just at the peril of solving the wrong problems, right? And what we see is the businesses, as a result of these changing times, the business has gotten dragged back into the decision making even more than they were in the past, because the development shops were moving so fast. The business necessarily couldn't keep up with just feeding them their next round of ideas. But now that we hit these changing times, the business is having to rethink their own business processes, how they approach customers. So now everybody is sort of like paused and been like, okay, so what should we really go do next? And it really got people, I think it accelerated their need and their want to look at BizOps.
Okay. All right. So what am I missing about BizOps? What haven't we talked about that, you think folks should understand about BizOps?
I think when I talked about that misalignment, I usually characterize it as a chronic misalignment. And what I mean by that is sort of an analogy to a disease. This isn't an acute disease. You take a pill and you feel better in the morning. It's more of a disease I think you manage. So I don't think that you ever wake up one day, do a bunch of work and be like, I'm now BizOps, right? I think it's something that you constantly focus on, that chronic misalignment. And there's some really healthy tension across these groups. It's not like you could or would want to take it to zero, but think about how you manage that misalignment over time and find ways to kind of harness that creative tension.
Is that a cultural thing? I mean, is that something that you think is kind of ingrained in companies and it's going to take longer than, 2 weeks or so in a series of I guess virtual workshops to change things? Or is it?
Yeah, that I think that was really the part I was touching on on the what did we miss, that this is not just technology, it's definitely also culture. And people, first of all, have to be willing to change, but you do have to invest to get people better aligned through workshops, common vision, common strategy, common understanding, and I think more than anything, transparency. So a lot of what we focus on is how to pull together the data from these different domains so that people can get a more end-to-end view of the problem. And then with that transparency and the data kind of comes trust. And then we hope after trust can come transformation.
Are you seeing more organizations actually adopting BizOps, or are we still kind of closer to, just kind of perfecting, or if you will, embracing DevOps and then kind of moving into BizOps from there? I mean, where are we on the bell curve?
I think it's accelerating. I think we've gone past early adopters onto now people kind of pulling for it. So I think we're kind of accelerating our way. We're certainly not mainstream. But I think some would maybe even argue DevOps hasn't made it mainstream as far as actual successful DevOps deployments. But I think we're past early adopters, and we're starting to get pull and inquiries from customers that we haven't reached out to, which makes me feel like the spark is lit and it's starting to grow.
Well, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm sure we're going to be hearing more and more about BizOps as time goes on, especially with the acceleration of digital transformation efforts in many, many organizations. So, Kurt, thank you so much for walking me through it. Really do appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, please stay tuned to TechStrong TV because we have lots more coming up.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, it's Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at MediaOps again. And it is time now for our new segment on TechStrong TV that highlights some of the webinars that we have coming up. You know, one of the many strengths I think that MediaOps has is the many webinars that we do produce each week. And I can tell you, as a frequent moderator for a lot of these webinars, you know, we have got some great content coming up on webinars. So without further ado, I do want to highlight some of the ones that we have scheduled for the upcoming week. All three of these are going to be on DevOps.com, so you can always go look for them there. Just go to the DevOps.com/webinars section, look in the upcoming webinar section to find them there. You can get registered there and find out everything you need to know about these webinars. But the first one I wanted to highlight is actually happening Monday, June 22nd at 9 a.m. Eastern, so please set your alarm clocks for that one. It's titled Business Continuity with Microservices-Based Apps and DevOps, Learnings from 8x8's Experience. So they focused on or the webinar, I should say, focuses on how 8x8 actually moved its cloud-based SaaS application to the public cloud from a data center, and it used microservices and Kubernetes and a microservices-based architecture to actually make that happen. So to meet increased customer demand. So if you are looking to possibly shift your infrastructure to the cloud and you're wondering if Kubernetes and microservices can kind of help ease that transition, this is definitely a webinar you want to watch. Okay, our next webinar that we have coming up is Tuesday, June 23rd at 11 a.m. And that is Eastern. This one is actually kind of interesting. It's the State of Mainframe DevOps webinar. It's being hosted by Broadcom, and it really offers a deep dive into the state of DevOps on the mainframes, where we stand today, you know, what we can expect, user adoption, all that good stuff. We also on the webinar will have Mary Johnston Turner, who is the Research Vice President for Cloud Management at IDC. And she is going to actually talk about a survey that IDC recently did on this very topic. So she's got lots of information to impart. Our final webinar for the week that I want to highlight today is another one based on a survey, and it's called The State of Open Source Security and DevSecOps Pipelines, I think it is. It's sponsored by Sneak. And this particular webinar is also happening Tuesday, June 23rd. It's happening at 1 p.m. Eastern. And Sneak is actually, for this one, teaming up with Docker. And they're going to talk about some of the recent findings in the State of Open Source Security Report 2020, which obviously includes a lot of takeaways for improving open source security throughout the entire delivery pipeline, and lots of useful information and educational experiences that both organizations have gone through in putting together this survey and dealing with their customers on this particular topic. So please, if you're interested in open source security, if you're interested in how it actually fits into the DevOps pipeline, another one worth attending, definitely. And that is it for the 3 webinars that I wanted to highlight today. Tune in on Monday, June 22nd, and we'll have more webinars that we're going to be highlighting for the week. So until then, stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, and we'll see you around. Thanks.
Thanks, Charlene. Great interview. Great webinar previews. Our webinars are pretty good, and we're constantly improving them. One of the things we're really trying to do now is make them more interactive with the audience. Less slideware, more interactivity. But anyway, speaking of interactivity, it's now time for our Analyst Corner with Mitch. Let's head over to Mitchell Ashley, founder and CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group. Mitchell, over to you.
Welcome to Analyst Corner. There are a convergence of a couple events that happened this week. Over the weekend, we happened to watch Apollo 13. Great movie. It's been out for a while with Tom Hanks. And it's just a great story of overcoming adversity and talk about the ultimate crisis and challenge. I was also on an online panel having a conversation about software delivery leadership, and some of the things around how do you help organizations can transform. And one of the topics that came up was failure is not an option. This has been one of those things that I kind of glommed onto, I don't know, really pretty early in my career. Is failure an option or not? That's a phrase, that's kind of one of those phrases like a perfect storm or failure's not an option. You hear it used a lot. And in some ways, I think it actually kind of limits and restricts our creativity when we use some of those phrases, or we take them too seriously. In the movie, and whether you're talking about an airplane crashing or getting the astronauts home after some disaster happening, as happened with Apollo 13. Yeah, certainly when there's life on the line, you don't want failure. That's the ultimate failure. We certainly don't want to have that happen, and you'll do whatever it takes to try to avoid that. But that's not the scenario that we live in every day. Very few things that we work on truly have lives on the line. They may, if you're in fire and rescue and things like that, certainly, or flying a plane. Yeah, we don't want to have anything bad happen. But most of the time, I think there's another way to look at failure. I mean, I've been part of organizations where some of the leaders couldn't even say the word failure. It was just so ingrained in their own image of what failure was, the ultimate negative, that we wouldn't call something a failure. So let me give you a different perspective about it. And I'll use Apollo 13 as the example. In that situation where Ed Harris pulled together, he's the actor that pulled together all the team, all the engineers, and said, okay, engineers, here's all the parts that they have on Apollo 13 and we need to solve this problem of carbon dioxide scrubbers. And the LEM and the command console weren't designed to do what we're doing, but we've got to figure out a way to keep these folks alive, keep the 3 astronauts alive. So by the time they get to Earth, we want them to land safely. Here it is. We got a limited time. Go figure it out. There has to be an answer. Now, ultimately, failure wasn't an option. We wanted the astronauts to come home. But the fact of the matter is, they had to fail probably hundreds of times to be able to figure out an answer for how to make the square filters fit into the round scrubber filter connections that were the differences between the two portions of the spacecraft. They didn't just say, oh, it's options to part B, part C, connected to part A. Good, here you go. Send this up to the astronauts and have them fix it this way. No, they took hours and they toiled over it. And it had to be something that they knew they got one shot at doing it, that we've got to fix this, but we've got one shot only within a limited amount of time. And they tried and tried. They tried multiple answers. Now you can go back to other situations like Edison and the light bulb and all kinds of things where the only truly great things that happen because of many, many, many failures at trying. I happen to play music, and you hear about an overnight success, in the music business. One of the artists that you might follow or like. Usually, there's a sort of another variation of that. Usually, it's a 20-year overnight success. That person's been doing this in nightclubs, toiling out, playing their instrument and singing and learning their craft. And, sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's skill, sometimes it's who knows what it is. It can be lots of hard work. There's the whole theory about how many hours you have to put in to develop, to truly be an expert at a certain topic. So when we think about failure as not an option, let's not use that as our daily mantra. Our daily mantra is failure is necessary for great things to happen. And learning from failure is what it's all about. On this online panel that I was part of, one of the other panelists was an analyst, and he talked about in the drug testing world, which I don't know anything about, and haven't been in pharmaceuticals at all in my career. But he talked about that when they design tests for new drugs and they take it out and test in scenarios with different control groups and see what the efficacy is and see if there's any negative effects on people, that they design many of those tests. They are designing it for a 50% failure rate. I'm sure for different tests are designed for different failure rates, but the reason why they do that is the learning doesn't, if everything succeeds, every test turns out positive, you kind of don't learn anything, if you're not if you're in that product development cycle. So you design it so that when failures occur, you learn things from that. Okay, we know that scenario doesn't work, or that scenario doesn't produce the expected results, or that scenario actually produces some unexpected results, positive or negative. But that's required to get to that final result of, okay, here's a product designed for a certain segment of the market that we know that works, and we know what the effects are, positive and negative, and we can go issue that in this case, it's people's lives on the line. That's how you kind of get to that. But you don't get there without tons of failure, and that's required. So we're in an environment now where there's a lot of opportunity for failure, and some of it painful. But I think that's positive. That's all growth for us in the organization. We talk about prioritization of cost cutting or allocation of resources, and where should we be spending our money? What should we be doing to learn from our customers during an economic downturn? How do we preserve long-term relationships and get better insight to high probability sales opportunities? Those are all things of, okay, maybe we aren't good at some of those things, and now's the opportunity to go fix that. But we're only going to fix it by experimenting, trying, learning, repeating, kind of a continuous improvement process. We're probably not going to get any of those things right first time out of the bat. If it was easy, we would have already done it. So take expressions like failure is not an option. Set that aside. Certainly, we want our organization to survive. We want our employees to thrive and have a good, good lifestyle that we're helping through our employment of them, or a great partnerships with our suppliers, and of course, happy customers. But that's going to take a lot of failure to get there, a lot of learning from failure that will help us be the best at what we can be and deliver the best goods and services to our customers, and have the best culture and business environment for our employees to work, and ultimately for us all to create the synergies that can really help magic happen. So as you're thinking about failure, first say the word, be comfortable. Failure happens. Just label it as #fail. We have entire videos, millions of videos on every social media channel, all about failures. Well, every time that skateboarder crashed and burned, every time that person tried to jump off this and land on the inner tube and missed, kind of had a bad crash landing. You know what? Ultimately, if they kept at it, they probably got really good at whatever they were trying to do. Maybe sometimes not, but let's hope that they were safe in trying some of those fails. So think of them a #fail and move on, learn from it, and keep the eye on the ultimate goal, what we're shooting for. So I hope you fail successfully. I hope you fail and learn a great deal from it. But I hope you ultimately achieve great, great, great things because you embraced failure as necessary to get to great things. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jane Grohl, CEO of the DevOps Institute. Some of you may know me. I did some of the segments for TechStrong TV as a lead up to the TechStrong conference, which was awesome. Well, now I'd like to introduce you to my new series known as Jane Explains. The tech space is moving so fast. The terminology, the applications, the environments, the strategies, the frameworks are accelerating faster than ever before. I'm an old IT director. I managed operations and particularly service desk for a very, very long period of time. And just being able to keep pace with things that have been happening over the last, say, 5 or 6 years has just definitely been a quest. And I'd like to bring some of that to you because, again, it's really challenging unless you're staying on top of all of the changes to be able to understand what's happening and more importantly, I think, why. I'm not the most technical person on the block, so I don't think I'll be tackling too many of the programming languages or other deep technologies, but maybe I'll invite a friend or a colleague to join me who can explain that further. So Jane Explains starts in a couple of weeks. If you have topics that you're interested in, please reach out. Happy to do that. And while you're at it, go up to the DevOps Institute website, www.devopsinstitute.com. Become a member. We have some videos up there known as Skill Up Minutes that may also help you set your learning journey on course. So stay tuned. Jane Explains, coming soon.
Okay, rounding out our show today for Thursday, the 18th of June, is our channel roundup with our king of channels, Mike Vizard. And today Mike is joined by his sidekick, Frank Olhurst from the Channel Roundup podcast. And Mike and Frank have some great information for us beyond just channel. So Mike, over to you.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, we're here talking about the channel with Frank Olhurst and Mike Vizard. How's everybody doing? Big news of the week is a deal between SAS and Microsoft. And channel guys are going, SAS, are they still around? And turns out they're still doing a thriving business in the analytics space. And they're going to standardize for their cloud applications on Azure. Why is this a big deal? Because it shows that Microsoft Azure has a lot more weight behind it than you might initially think. Of course, AWS is 2, maybe 3 times larger than Azure at the moment. However, Microsoft has Office 365 going for it, and it's creating this huge volume of data that's being accessed by more end users than what we're currently maybe seeing in the Azure space. That creates this phenomenon known as data gravity. And what happens is ISVs see all this data starting to show up on Azure, and they start to bring their applications over with it. And then you get this multiplication effect where the more ISVs that show up on the platform, the more data there is, the more end users there will be. So I put it to you, Frank, do you think Azure is going to be a big deal, and can they really take down AWS?
I don't know if they can take down AWS, but they're definitely going to become a much bigger deal. The question that kind of remains is, what controls is going to be put around all of that data? And what type of agreements are the end users willing to make with Microsoft about that data? As we all know that, like, if you use something like Gmail, you kind of give Google kind of permission to look at, what's going through your account for them to do target advertising. Now, is Microsoft going to be willing to make some sort of an arrangement like that so that data can be aggregated and more analytics can be put on top of it? So there's going to be a lot of issues around, privacy concerns, how protected data is going to be, and what, ISVs and other folks are going to allow Microsoft to access via Azure to drive analytics. Now, a lot of it could be, stripped down data, no metadata, but just traffic. But even that brings a lot of value to when it comes to distributing workloads over the cloud or finding, the the shortest path to an application. And there can be some tremendous performance benefits if all of that is leveraged properly. And then on top of that, there's a lot of intelligence that can be gathered that Microsoft, with their applications that they offer through Azure and through Office 365, can really become a warehouse of this sterilized data to help drive some analytics.
Call me crazy, but I think there's going to be a lot of terms and conditions when it comes to accessing data in the Azure cloud.
Yeah.
All right, so this is going to be the new battle for who owns what and who dominates in the future. Much like we argued about platforms of Windows versus Linux, we're going to be having a conversation soon about what is data, how open should it be, who controls it, and what maybe undue influence is the provider of the platform possibly exercising on that data as it starts to aggregate on their cloud. Speaking of the cloud, there was a report this week from Snow Software, one of the first to come out since the COVID crisis, and not surprisingly, it shows that massive amounts of workloads are shifting into the cloud. People can't access their local data center, so they kind of upped that investment and made that shift. But it also shows that a third of the respondents are renegotiating their cloud contracts. Frank, I think there's an opportunity for partners to get in the middle of that conversation.
Oh, most definitely. Even if the partner takes on the role as kind of the advocate of, what is fair and proper constraints around the contracts of who you're going to deal with from a platform perspective. Or, the partner or the solution provider can get involved in looking at and comparing the different platforms that are available, the different cloud offerings, to tell a potential customer what is the best service available to them and why. And also the solution providers kind of have that whole background to bring to the table when it comes to things like, continuity, failover, backup, disaster recovery, and all these other things that the typical end user at the enterprise treats as an afterthought. They select on, this is the fastest and this is the cheapest, and let's go with that without taking into consideration some of these other elements that could really, really mess things up for them in case of a disaster.
Do you think that the channel partners are able to have that conversation beforehand, or is it something that happens after the fact when the customer figures out that the total cost of the cloud is not as appealing as they initially thought?
Well, I think there's an opportunity for the solution providers to get involved from the point of view of let us help you choose a cloud, or thinking about a new cloud, talk to us first. To be able to, guide them through some of these, small print items in the SLAs or in the contracts. With so much of a push from the marketing angle behind the big cloud service providers, it might be a little bit hard to be heard above the noise. And they might have to turn to kind of the current events of what's going on, whether it's the COVID-19 crisis or, even the big outages that we just saw happen yesterday, which I was impacted by. I couldn't get online and my phone wasn't working, to be able to, explain to folks about, how important 5 nines might be to their business and what providers can bring forth. So you might have to treat it from the point of view that, have you been burned recently by the cloud? Or have you found that the cloud just hasn't, been able to support your transformation needs as you move to a mobile or work from home workforce? And that might be the way in to say that, hey, avoid problems in the future by thinking about them now.
All right, well, we used to get snow days and whatever other flood days wherever you are in the country, but now it looks like since we're all working from home, we're going to get cloud days where no one can access the internet, so therefore we all have the day off, right?
Yeah.
All right. My other question to you, though, is are all the workloads going to move into the cloud? We saw that Dell, just in the latest first quarter reports, which doesn't even begin to cover the COVID crisis, took a shellacking on server and storage sales. And I think that that may get worse before it gets better. So are all workloads heading into the cloud, or what's going to remain on premise?
You know what? They're going to probably head into some form of the cloud. It might be a local private cloud, but the idea is that I think we're going to see the way workloads are executed take on certain uniformity across them. This way, if you're running them on your own internal private cloud and you want to move them to a public cloud, you can. Or if you have something out in the public cloud and you're concerned about data or things like that, you can move them into your own private cloud. So I think on-premise will always have a place, especially for many businesses that are dealing with sensitive intellectual property. But I think it's going to really come down to, almost a Coke versus Pepsi type of fight when it comes down to it. Should I, have my cloud resources running on-prem because, we're all located on-prem, or should I have them distributed in a public cloud so that we can use them from wherever we need to? It's going to be driven by the needs of the business.
I don't know. I can't find a Pepsi machine anywhere I go these days, so let's see what happens. Speaking of what's going to change, this whole work from home phenomenon was a celebration this week at the Cisco Live event where they were basically, I guess, giving IT a pat on the back for all the work that they've done in terms of enabling people to work from home and how great the technology was. And the unspoken part of that equation was, and boy, aren't those networks awesome. But they did put a couple of bundles together for small businesses. And I wonder, should channel partners be focusing again on small business? Everybody's going back to work, or is it too early?
Might be a little too early. There's still a lot of uncertainty around this whole COVID crisis. I mean, you have folks out there talking about, we're at the peak of the first wave or we're starting to enter the second wave. The only things that we kind of know for certain is that there'll probably not be another wholesale shutdown of, business. But on the flip side, there's a lot of businesses that just didn't pull through this crisis. So I think, the focus right now should be on kind of the mid-enterprise and larger enterprise, because they're, believe it or not, are the most agile to deal with, the changes that are coming because of their investment in technology. Small businesses probably going to have to play catch up. And, those that have survived have figured out how to survive with or without the channel, and they're going to deal with those folks in the same fashion that they have before.
All right, we'll see them all in 2021 as we fight the fight again. Meanwhile, at the edge, OpenStack is talking about a platform called Starling X. It is an amalgamation of OpenStack, Kubernetes, and a bunch of other technologies with the idea that you can create this container-optimized edge computing platform. And I wonder, as we go forward, regardless of which edge computing platform anybody might be using, do you think that there might be more workloads at the edge ultimately than there are in the cloud?
Well, we've started to see a lot of things move to the edge. And, certain things like even security is moving to the edge in more of a fashion. You look at, secure access service edge, where you're moving the security stack to the edge. You're moving other elements to the edge, pieces of connectivity to the edge. You look at how, containerization fits into the picture, and it becomes a little more logical to see more and more happening at the edge. What it comes down to, though, is that sometimes managing the edge is a little bit more difficult than people anticipate. And, you run into these situations when it comes to certain things, such as like failing over at the edge. It's a little more complicated than people, give it credit for. So I think there is potential for a lot more to move to the edge to address certain workloads. But I think people are going to have to be very well aware of the management challenges and measuring the performance and building security around edge computing when it really comes down to deploying it in the real world.
I think for all the reasons you just described, edge computing will be very, very, very good for the channel because management is going to be hard. And when that's hard, people go to the partners.
Yes, very true.
All right. Last thing we want to talk about, DataStax is a private beta of a AI ops engine they're calling Vector for their Cassandra database. Those of you who don't know what Cassandra is, it's an open source wide column database that developers are very fond of these days because it's fast as hell. But my question to you, Frank, is AI ops. I know we keep talking about this, but it seems like every time I turn around, there's yet another announcement. So is it real or not?
I think people are quickly beginning to realize that there's a lot of limitations around AI. A lot of things that they weren't, taking into account when it comes to how AI ops and, the algorithms perform and the results that they get from what they've created. It's almost like AI has a mind of its own. But so I think people are running into challenges, and I think they've put a lot of eggs in that AI basket, and they're starting to find out that maybe AI isn't the answer to everything. Sure, it can help with automating certain processes, but when it comes to that intuitiveness that's needed, AI just isn't there yet. It's great for finding that needle in the haystack, but it can't tell you how that needle got there or why it's even there to begin with.
I get your point, but I think that everybody's going to have their own little digital IT buddy, I think. And this is going to be some form of AI ops where it won't automate things for you and it won't do things on your behalf, but it will surface things that you should know or things that might bite you real soon if you don't act on them. I like to say, wouldn't it be great if I could come in the office and just say to Alexa, what 3 things are going on today that are likely to get me fired? And then I get a little surface report that says, here, focus on this. So I don't think that AI ops replaces the need for humans, but I think we're getting to the point where managing IT at this level of scale requires a digital buddy.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that to an extent. It's just that I don't think the digital buddies are quite there yet to do it the way that we want. It's going to take a lot more investment in machine learning to build that intuitiveness into that digital buddy.
All right. Well, it could be like, the Skipper and Gilligan. It's all about the little buddy relationship. What happens. All right.
Buddy might get you in a lot of trouble, though.
All right, guys. As always, thanks for having us, and back to you in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Thanks, Mike and Frank. Great channel roundup. I appreciate it. Well, folks, it's been a good 2.5, 3 hours here today. I think we had some great content. Hope you really enjoyed that Cornelia Davis GitOps presentation from TechStrong Con, as well as, some of the great interviews and commentary from Charlene and Mitchell and myself. Thanks to Ashok Reddy, Alon Gromonsky for coming on as well, as Kurt Sand over from Broadcom. Also, my friend Jane, my partner, Jane Grohl from the DevOps Institute, had a little promo of a new series or a new segment she's going to be doing regularly. Explain with Jane. And I hope you had a chance to see the promo, respond to her. She's looking for great ideas and topics of interest to you. So we won't be on live tomorrow. We'll be showing a best of show for Friday the 19th. And I'll be back here, God willing, on Monday with an all-new show with some great guests and great content. Until then, be well, be safe, be strong, TechStrong. This is Alan Schimmel. We're out.